ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. The week of the offseason is rolling right along. We have another loaded show for everybody today. Originally, we were just going to talk about the 23 and 24 recruiting classes, and if there's just kind of this national bias from major outlets against Notre Dame. And then about half an hour ago, ESPN released their second edition of their way too early top 25 rankings. So we figured no better way to kick off the show than talking about that. And then afterwards, we're going to get into if there's a recruiting bias against Notre Dame, talk about the roles that the 23 and 24 recruiting class are going to play on this season and the impact that they're going to have. So, Brian, another loaded show today, man.
And that's where the recruiting rankings bias thing came from, because we're sitting there having this conversation about how the 24 and 25 classes are going to dominate Notre Dame's starting lineup, like dominate it. Like it is without a doubt going to be the primary drivers of the roster in every way imaginable. And then you look at the recruiting rankings, and then neither of them are top 10 classes. And you're like, okay, and the 25 class wasn't ranked very high either. So it's like, what's the deal here? Like, is there a Notre Dame recruiting rankings bias? Is it something else? Is it maybe a combination of a couple things? So we're going to have some fun talking about that, Trev. I cannot wait to have that conversation and put some numbers to it, right? So like it's easy. Oh, these guys are biased against Notre Dame, and like, well, are they? Or they just have bad evaluations? And so we're going to have some fun with that conversation, Trev. And but of course, like the ESPN top 25 came out. I'm looking forward to talking about that, and then we'll explain to you why we'll dive into the 23, 24 classes, because they're together, they form a foundation, but I think in certain ways they each serve a bit of a different role as their top priority for the 2026 season. But the reality is, if these classes end up not being as good as you and I thought they were when they signed, then Notre Dame will fall short this season. If they're as good as we think that they were, then Notre Dame will be a team that's a legitimate title contender. So we're gonna have some fun with that. And a fun day, Trev. I was like, Trev sends me this ESPN updated post-spring top 25, which is funny. They wait till all the SEC teams are done and then they drop it. Like, well, there's still some other conferences that are, going through spring, but whatevs. But we're going to have some fun talking about that too, Trev, because ESPN today did come out with Mark Schlabach put out a post-spring updated top 25 for the 26th season.
He did, and it's an interesting read, and there's some of the usual suspects up at the top. We're going to kind of break this down and talk about the top 10, give our overall thoughts on that, where Notre Dame falls, and then talk about the other rankings 11 through 25. So if you have yet to see the article, quick refresher, in ESPN's newest and latest way too early top 25, Mark Schlabach had Ohio State at number 1, Oregon at number 2, Georgia at number 3, Notre Dame 4th, Texas at 5, Indiana at 6, Miami at 7, Texas Tech at 8, Ole Miss at 9, and then the Texas A&M Aggies at number 10. So, Brian, Notre Dame comes in at number 4. Their previous ranking in their first edition of the Way Too Early, they had Notre Dame at 3rd. They broke this down and talked about key players lost, key additions, and then the outlook of the season. So, overall thoughts on Notre Dame being number 4 in this new edition?
Yeah, like it's funny. Part of the reason we want to talk about it is because we kind of brought this up yesterday. I don't think Notre Dame will be 1 or 2, maybe 3, but most likely 5-ish. And so they had him 3 in the initial one. And then what Mr. Schlabach wrote was they're now looking at it. That was done right after the season, but now they've gone through the portal and all these other kind of things. And now the rosters are different, coaching changes and all this other kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, he has Georgia a spot ahead of Notre Dame. He doesn't explain why Notre Dame jumped 1 spot ahead of or behind Georgia. At the end of the day, Trev, it's one of those ones where I don't agree with it. I would have Notre Dame ahead of Georgia, but it's 1 spot. And, look, Notre Dame beat Georgia 2 years ago. Georgia's made the playoffs each of the last 2 years. They've yet to win a game, but they still keep winning the SEC. And so – you want to put Georgia 3rd. I wouldn't. They wouldn't even be my highest ranked SEC team, but I also understand it. I have no problem with it. Really, the other thing note, Trev, is for all the talk of Notre Dame's schedule sucks, it's super soft. They don't play anybody other than Miami. Well, Notre Dame also has on ESPN's top 25, they play the number 7, the number 12, and the number 22 teams in the country. So there's at least 3 teams that ESPN thinks are pretty good. And 2 that they think are basically playoff teams, essentially, because if you're in the top 12, they view you as one of the 12 best teams in the country. But so I just kind of like to throw that little nugget in there for all the people that like to say, I don't play anybody. Well, I mean, you can argue the bottom half of the schedule is not good, but the top part of the schedule is still pretty flipping good this season. What I think has some Notre Dame fans talking, well, I don't like the schedule, is because the two of the 3 top teams on the schedule aren't brand names. If they played Texas A&M and USC, and they were 12th and 22nd on top of playing Miami, we would not hear the same outcry from Notre Dame fans even about the schedule soft. Because even we as Notre Dame fans tend to be brand gazers. We tend to be helmet sticker gazers. You know what I mean? Like, what's the logo on the helmet as opposed to what's the quality of the team on the schedule? And I thought that was pretty interesting. But the other one, Trev, is top 10. Any big gripes with the top 10? What are your thoughts on where Notre Dame is ranked, and any other gripes that you may or may not have with the top 10?
Nah, where Notre Dame is ranked, I assumed. I mean, I've been saying it for weeks. Ohio State's going to be the number 1 team, whether it's the way too early or it's the actual Associated Press poll that's going to come out a week before the season kicks off. That's not surprising to me in the slightest. I understand Oregon being up there. We see the Georgia thing the same way. Who's 3, who's 4? I don't have much beef with that. It's they literally, Mark Slabaugh just flip-flopped them from the previous rankings that came out. So I don't have too much of it. They've kept their key player losses to a minimum, and maybe that's where Mark's opinion changed. You know, Zechariah Branch and Monroe Freeling and C.J. Allen, is that impactful as Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Malachi Fields? We can have that debate, but I don't have too much beef outside of that. Brian, are there any teams inside of the top 10 that you're just like, what the heck are you doing there? What's going on?
Well, there's one. I actually don't hammer Mark Schlabach for having them in the top 10, but I think they're going to end up looking way overrated, and that's Ole Miss. Ole Miss was a Final Four team last year, so I can't. They bring their quarterback back. I can't. The head coach who led them through the playoffs is back. I can't look at Mark Schlabach and be like, dude, that's such a bad pick. I can't. I get it. I just think they're going to end up being way worse than people think that they are. Way worse. You can't bump LSU way up because of the presence of Lane Kiffin and then pretend like him not being at Ole Miss has some kind of giant impact, or has like no impact whatsoever on where Ole Miss should be. It's kind of like, yeah, pick a lane. Either A, Lane's not that big of a loss, which means LSU didn't exactly hire a needle mover, or he is a giant needle mover at LSU, which you and I think that he is, and you're not dinging them at all. I mean, you want to drop Notre Dame a spot because let's say they lost 3 defensive coaches. Well, Ole Miss lost a lot more than that. You know what I mean? So I think Ole Miss is way too high, but it's also one, Trev, and I'd like to get your thoughts on Ole Miss because we haven't totally dove into them, and we will this summer. But I don't even know that I'm going to have in my top 20 when we do our post-spring top 25. I'm really not high on Ole Miss. What are your thoughts on that? Well, should they be there? Are you okay with it? And then, how do you see that team going into next year?
Yeah, I understand Mark's logic. The common theme that I'm sensing through this is it's very quarterback driven. And with Trinidad Chambliss getting granted another year, I think Mark is leaning a lot into that with these rankings. I mean, look at the teams up at the top. You know, the top 4 teams, you have Julian Sain, Dante Moore, Gunnar Stockton, and CJ Carr all up at the top of the list, followed by Arch Manning, followed by Josh Hoover at Indiana, Darian Mensah at Miami. You get Brendan Sorsby at Texas Tech. And I think he's just following suit here with getting Trinidad Chambliss back with Ole Miss. As far as where I would put them, Ole Miss is not going to be in my top 10. For me, it's too early to say. They'll be somewhere in my top 25. They're going to be closer to 25th than they are going to be the top 10 in my rankings. Don't know where that's necessarily going to fall. At this stage, I get it. They go 13-2 last year, 7-1 in the SEC. But quarterback is a big hitting point with what Mark is evaluating these teams on. And when Trinidad Chambliss got granted the the additional year of eligibility. I assumed he, along with some other people like at, PFF puts one out, or CBS Sports, or, any one of the other major outlets, Ole Miss is going to be hovering somewhere around the bottom part of the top 10 because quarterback play is similar to the NFL draft. Sometimes it gets a little bit overemphasized a little bit. And so that's what I think played into Ole Miss's rankings. I personally wouldn't have them in the top 10, but there are some other teams outside of the top 10 where it's a little bit more head scratching for me than Ole Miss at ninth. And I know you feel the same way about that. Now, quick refresher for everybody. I rattled off the top 10. Some of the other teams in here: LSU's 11th, BYU's 12th, Oklahoma's 13th, Michigan's 14, Penn State's at 15, Alabama's at 16, Washington's 17, Utah's 18, Iowa's 19, USC's at 20. And then to round out the bottom part of the top 25, you got Louisville at 21, SMU at 22, TCU at 23, Houston at 24, and the Tennessee Volunteers at 25. So, Brian, within those, were there any that stuck out to you? I know that LSU at 11th you briefly mentioned, but how are you feeling about that one?
Yeah, you and I talked about that one a little bit before the show started, Trevor, and I feel like that's a bit of a middle ground ranking for LSU. If you're someone who has there's two ways to look at LSU. One is, what's their potential, what's their upside, right? Like Sam Leavitt is what people think that he is. Lane Kiffin's able to make an immediate impact at Ole Miss or at LSU. The remade offensive line clicks pretty well with better coaching. The defensive coordinator is able to really get that defense going now that they have an offense that actually knows what the heck they're doing, and a head coach that knows how to actually win big games. Are those things going to help? I think Coach Baker's going to thrive under Lane Kiffin. That's something that I was surprised by, is Lane Kiffin's done a better job than I would argue a lot of the other offensive head coaches, in that Ole Miss has had some salty teams on defense. Like, this past year's defense wasn't great, but the 24 defense was big time. And that was with a not very good defensive coordinator, in my opinion. As you know, I'm not very high on Pete Golding. I think he's a coach who I think understands, it's great if we score 40 points a game. We want to score a bunch of points, but if we can't stop people, it's going to make it a lot harder to win. And you've seen a shift. And Ole Miss was spending a lot of money on defensive players in the portal the last couple of years. And obviously did that again this year at LSU. So when I look at them, I think there's upside wise, they could be a top 5 to 6 team. Okay, fair. I don't know that they're going to get there. That's a lot to go right in one season. I'd say give them 2 years to get there is what I would say. But I could see it if everything clicks. I mean, heck, Indiana went from 3-9 in the Big Ten to playing in the National College Football Playoffs in 1 year. I mean, it can be done. And then there's the whole, that's great, but I need to see it. They still went 7-6 last year. So what's the middle ground? And I think that's that 11 to 14 range for LSU. And so I think I personally would kind of find the middle ground with LSU. Now that we see the roster and all that, I would probably have them in that 11 to 14 range is most likely where I'll have them in our top 25. And I thought Mark Schlabach did the same thing. And you just read his write-up. He's kind of there's a lot to like here, but there's also still some questions here. So here's that middle ground that we're going to have them in. It's one of those things, Trevor, where I think I could probably push back on a couple teams that they're ahead of, but not have an issue with necessarily 11. For example, I think Oklahoma's way too low. I think Oklahoma at 13 is too low. And I'm going to have Oklahoma in my top 10 when we do our top 10. So I think there's several spots too low. I'd have Oklahoma over LSU. But that's because I'd have Oklahoma inside my top 10, not because I would drop LSU down to 14 or down to 13 and then move Oklahoma up. So I think that's one team that stuck out to me, Trev, is, we always talk about, the overrated SEC, and there are some overrated SEC teams. I actually didn't think overall this was a puff piece for the SEC. Honestly, Trev, as I'm looking through the rankings, okay, you kind of maxed out the potential ranking for LSU. You have Georgia 3, Texas 5. I don't really have a huge issue with those. Miami 9, again, I don't agree with it, but I understand it, right? Texas A&M 10. Oh, okay, well, I may actually have them a little bit lower. We'll see when the rankings come out. But again, they're a playoff team, and they've got some good players coming back. I get it. I think Oklahoma's too low. I think Alabama at 16 close to being right. We'll see about that. But like after that, you've got to go all the way down to 25 before you have another SEC team in Tennessee. There's no Missouri, there's no Vanderbilt, there's no Florida, there's no like let's jump on the Auburn bandwagon before they've coached a game there. Like I thought in that regard he did a pretty fair job. I think there's as much hype to the Big Ten, and matter of fact, I think more of the overranked teams that I thought from his rankings were a couple Big Ten teams, not the SEC teams.
Yeah, we see that very much the same. The level of variance with the SEC teams in this list are interesting, especially when you go and look at what FanDuel has some of these teams set at as their over-under win totals. I mean, Georgia's ranked third in the entire country in this way too early. Their over-under is 9.5 wins. Then you jump down to 11th where LSU is. Theirs is 8.5. So we're talking about a one-game difference here is the difference between the third overall ranking and the 11th. But then Oklahoma's one game back from where LSU is. Their over-under win total is set at 7.5, which I still think is criminally too low. But they're only a 2-spot difference. Now, I'd be remiss to say that Mark Schlabach relied on FanDuel's over-under win totals to make this list. I don't think that that's really what went into his analysis of this way too early ranking, but I do think it's interesting to see that level of variance. But I'm with you. I think by and large, the Big Ten got a little bit more of a bump in this ranking than what the SEC did. Two teams in particular back-to-back in the rankings. Michigan at 14 and Penn State at 15, I think is a little bit too high for them, especially Penn State at 15th. I mean, look, again, you and I were talking about these rankings before the show came out, and I posed the question, if this was Iowa State, would they have been 15th in this way too early rankings, or are you paying attention to the fact that Penn State as a program made the college football playoff semifinals 2 years ago with essentially none of the players that are on the current roster? I mean, what Mark does in this article is he goes and he breaks down key players lost and key additions. Here are the key additions. Rocco Becht, Iowa State. Chase Sowell, Iowa State. Brett Eskeldon, Iowa State. Benjamin Brahmer, Iowa State. Carson Hansen, Iowa State. Trevor Burr, Iowa State. You guys are getting the picture. Now, the other addition that they have is Matt Campbell, who was the head coach where? At Iowa State. So if you just switch out the logo in the conference, and it goes from Big 10 to Big 12, and it goes from the Penn State mascot to the Iowa State mascot, are they still 15th? I think that answer is no. Now, I think that's a little bit blindness to the logo and the conference that they're playing in. You could argue the schedule, because we on the show have talked about before, Penn State might accidentally work their way into a 9-3, potentially even 10-2 schedule or record with what their schedule is this upcoming year. That's the argument that you want to make. That's fine, but 15th I still think is too high. And then Michigan at 14th, I get it. With a bad head coach, they went 9-4. Yeah. But 14 is still too high. Should they be ranked? Yeah, I think so. I think Kyle Whittingham is a 10 times better coach than what Sharon Moore is. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd be willing to argue that until the cows come home. But 14 inside of the top 15 is too high for a team that is having a new regime take over. You had some key losses, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Every key player lost for Michigan is on defense. Derek Moore, Rayshon Benny, Jimmy Rolder, Ernest Hausman, Cole Sullivan. I mean, you lost key players at every level of your defense. So that's how I look at those two. But Brian, I'm with you, man. Big Ten got a little bit of a bump in this one.
Trev, there's a team that you and I will continue to have a difference of opinion on throughout the offseason, and that's Alabama. I think what's great about this ranking is there's finally something regarding Alabama that you and I can agree on. The fact that they have Penn freaking State ranked ahead of Alabama in this top 25 is one of the craziest things on the planet. Yeah. And now I'm someone who literally spent a week going on national radio shows talking about how it's an absolute joke that Alabama was going to be in over Notre Dame. I have no problem ripping Alabama. I say all the time, it is a joke how much the media overhypes Alabama and pretends like this is still this is still Nick Saban's team. But I'm sorry, having the Penn State Cyclones ranked ahead of Alabama in the college football top 25 is one of the screwiest, nuttiest things I've ever seen in a top 25 ranking. Like, listen, here's the without any context explanation we could make. Listen. They weren't as bad as their record was last year. And I would agree with that. That was not a 6-6 roster. We both agree on that. That is not a team that should have lost to most of the teams that they lost to. But the roster that underachieved is not back. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't return a bunch of those guys. They lose one of the arguably the best interior offensive linemen in this draft is a Penn State kid. They lost their quarterback, one off the NFL, the other transferred to Virginia Tech. They lost their top 2 running backs that were, in a lot of instances, like the heart and soul of that football team. Deny Dennis Sutton. I think Zane Durant is gone. A.J. Harris transferred. Zaquie Watley is gone. Like, I'm sorry. They lost all their best players. Amari Campbell transferred to Tennessee. Chaz Coleman transferred to Tennessee. And they replaced him with a bunch of kids who are nice players but came from an 8-4 Big 12 team. Like, it'd be one thing if, like, a bunch of Texas Tech players transferred in or a bunch of BYU players transferred in. This is Iowa State. Like, they were a mediocre Big 12 team last season, Trev. So I was floored when I saw that the Penn State Cyclones were ranked 15th in the rankings. Like, absolutely floored. And then they have them ahead of Bama. Like, you have them ahead of Washington. You had them ahead of Utah. You had them ahead of Iowa. USC. I mean, look, the really good Penn State team from 2 years ago barely beat a bad USC team 2 years ago. So I was shocked when I saw that. And having them ranked that high, I thought was a little bonkers. And people say, their schedule's soft. And I don't care, but they're still not going to be a very good football team. Is their schedule softer than, I don't know. Here, let's look at this, Trev. Is their schedule any softer than this? All right. How about this? Kansas State, South Dakota, Iowa, Arkansas State, Arizona, Cincinnati, Colorado, BYU, Arizona State, TCU, Kansas, Oklahoma State. Is it any softer than that? Because that's what most of their roster played against last year. Like, so why are we assuming – this is what I'm saying. Why are we assuming they're going to go 10-2 with basically Iowa State's roster and some leftovers from Penn State? Because we're still thinking that, James Franklin is still here. They're still going to be really talented. And my opinion is I don't think they are going to be as talented as they've been in the past. I'm not saying they're going to go 6-6 again, but this roster has a lot to prove before I'm ready to be like, oh yeah, they're back to top 15. They're back. Like, logos don't win games, y'all. Players do. You know what I mean? Otherwise, Notre Dame would have like 13 national championships since 1988. You know what I mean? If Cool Helmets won championships, Notre Dame would be winning the championship every year. Be in the Final Four every year for sure. But that's not what wins games. And they're not – I mean, we say Penn State Cyclones is a joke, but it's kind of also making a point. You lost a bunch of studs. Like, who from the 25-4 playoff team is still there? It's a very short list.
Yeah, the
couple
Rojas
offensive linemen,
I think. Yeah.
Rojas is back. Kobe King's gone. AJ, like, their secondary, all those guys are gone. All those, the receivers are gone. Like, Tyler Warren is gone. The 2 running backs are gone. Their quarterback is gone. All their stud defensive linemen are gone. And a lot of the top recruits, like the young talented players like Chaz Coleman and guys like that, transferred out. Ethan Grunkmeyer, Luke Reynolds, a tight end who we think is a stud. I think didn't he transfer to Virginia Tech as well?
I believe so, yes.
So, yeah, I would argue that of the in and out from Penn State and Virginia Tech, I would argue that Virginia Tech landed more good players than what Penn State did.
Agreed. And here's the thing. I think Matt Campbell is a solid Power 4 coach. I do. I don't want to make this sound like I think he's a bad coach, but what was the season that Matt Campbell had at Iowa State where their narrative turned into if he just had more resources like a Penn State, he'd become a playoff caliber head coach? What's that season? When he made it onto that stage against Arizona State, a team that was projected to finish dead last in their league, they got decimated in the Big 12 championship game. Like we talk a lot about non-competitive conference championship games. I mean, that's right up there with them. And so that's my biggest gripe. What's the coaching staff that's coming? Because that's the counter with Michigan. We can talk about the level of talent on their roster, but I like the Kyle Whittingham pickup. I like getting Jay Hill from BYU to be their defensive coordinator. Bryce Underwood goes into year 2. There is at least an argument to be made with Michigan at 14th. Not one that I'm willing to have.
Sure.
But there's an argument there. Penn State, I got nothing.
Yes. I think Michigan's a little too high, but you can make that argument.
Exactly.
You can absolutely make that argument. I I'd have them lower, but you can make that argument. There's no argument to make for Penn State, in my opinion, that high. Just a couple other quick observations, Trevor, as we wrap this segment up. I did appreciate that they gave a little bit of respect to the Big 12 in this ranking. Like, there's 5 Big 12 teams in this ranking. We've talked about this. There's no great teams in the Big 12 after maybe Texas Tech, and I think they're great for their league. I don't think they're on the same level as the other top teams. I like that he didn't overrate Texas Tech. They're in the top 10 where they should be, but they're, I think, 8, right? 8 or 9, not 5. But you had 5 Big 12 teams in there. I thought that was proper respect to the Big 12. The ACC didn't get a lot of respect in this ranking, honestly, nor did it necessarily deserve it.
Yeah.
But there's still several teams. I mean, obviously you have Miami all the way up at number 7. And then you've got a couple ACC teams down at the bottom of the rankings. You've obviously got SMU at 22, Louisville at 21. So there's a little bit of an ACC flavor. That's about all the ACC deserved. The only other team I don't know that I agree or disagree with it. I haven't, but with all the hype that people are getting about this being the year for USC, I was a little surprised he had them 20th. I don't know that I agree or disagree with it. USC is not a team I've necessarily wrapped my head around completely what they're going to be this year. I would probably say I think he's maybe closer to being right than a lot of the people putting USC in the top 13. I've seen a lot of that, but it still just surprised me that he didn't go with a lot of the groupthink on some certain teams, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, we see that very much the same, man. The way too early rankings, some of them, really with all of them, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But by and large, outside of the Penn State thing, a little bit of the Michigan thing, I didn't have too much gripe about this one. This one wasn't an overall bad list. I'm with you. But I am shocked that USC wasn't a touch higher. The only other team in there that I understand why they're not ranked, so this isn't me saying that they should be, but putting Penn State at 15th and then leaving Clemson unranked, I thought was a little interesting. With some of the younger talent that they have coming back, they still have one of, in my opinion, a top 10 head coach in college football. He's no longer second or third, but he's not 15th, in Dabo Swinney. So I thought that was a little interesting, but I have no issue with them not being ranked. I just thought trend-wise it was interesting.
TCU being ranked was a little interesting as well. Penn State at 15, but no Arizona, who won 9 games last year. No Arizona State, no Vanderbilt, no Missouri, no Florida, no Auburn. I thought was interesting. Not that those teams deserve to be ranked, but like what has Matt Campbell shown you at Iowa State that makes you think he's going to be able to maximize what they've done? Somebody in the chat will say, really, like, what's the difference between Curt Cignetti taking over in Penn State? And I would argue, well, number one, I think Curt Cignetti brought in way better players. There was an Omar Cooper already on the roster at Penn State or at Indiana. Who's the Omar Cooper that they're inheriting at Penn State? I don't think that player exists, but Matt Campbell's a nice football coach, but here's what he's done every year at Iowa State: 3-9, 8-5, 8-5, 6-7, 6, 9-3, 7-6, 4-8, 7-6, 11-3, 8-4. One season of 10 plus wins. Oh, it's Iowa State. I get all that, but we've seen coaches do that at Iowa State. Curt Cignetti is at James Madison, taking them from the FCS to the FBS, and they won 20 games his first 2 years in the FBS as a brand new FBS team with an entirely recruited FCS roster. That's the difference. So it was interesting, Trev, but overall, I honestly, outside of Penn State, I don't have a lot of giant beefs. Like, Oklahoma's too low, but it's not like they should be 5th. You know what I mean? Like, they're 3 to 4, 5 spots too low. It's not a giant oversight. Overall, I thought it was a good list. Surprisingly sound list. Even with the stuff I didn't agree with. It's not like, I can't believe this moron had Georgia 1 spot ahead of Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't do it, but whatevs. So that's where I'm at.
Ron, getting in the next part of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're going to switch gears a little bit, talk about some topics a little bit more Notre Dame centric. Obviously, we just broke down the way too early top 25 that was just released by ESPN, but Now it's time to get into a Notre Dame recruiting discussion, and it's not recruits that they're targeting; it's recruits that have actually been on campus years and are going to be an integral part of this year's roster. And we're going to start out that conversation by talking about if there's a bias against Notre Dame in recruiting, which, when you look at the outlook of the 23 and the 24 class, is a very fair discussion to have. When you look at things like top players returning in college football, when you look at top rosters in college football, Notre Dame is always mentioned in those conversations with quarterback or with players like CJ Carr, Leonard Moore, Drake Bowen, Adon Schuler, Tay Johnson, Christian Gray, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert. Well, all of those players have a lot of things in common. And the thing that they have in common is, yes, they are amongst some of the best players at their position groups returning in college football. And two, they are members of the 23 and 24 recruiting classes. Both classes were majorly underrated by a lot of the major outlets. So, Brian, that got us thinking. Is there a bias against Notre Dame in national recruiting outlets? And that's where we're going to start this conversation.
Yeah, I think let's give you guys some data. So right now, we just talked about ESPN, not Brian Driscoll and Trevor Trowbridge, two Notre Dame guys doing a show about Notre Dame, talking to Notre Dame fans. So of course they're going to hype up Notre Dame, right? Forget what we think of this football team. Let's just look at the most recent ESPN preseason top 25. They had Notre Dame fourth in that preseason top 25. And yet, when you look at the recruiting rankings, and we put this list together, Trev, here's some recruiting rankings for Notre Dame to consider. Let's do this first, Trev. When you look at the starting roster, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 of Notre Dame's 22 starters are from those two classes. And that's just the guys that Notre Dame signed out of high school. And you throw in, if you project Francis Brew to start, he was in that class. So was Tion Gray. He was in that class. So you're talking about a big chunk of your starting lineup of a team that everybody – and look, it's not just the starters. Kingston Viliama-Asa we don't have as listed as a starter because he didn't start last year, and they returned the starters. But if you take out Jaden Osbury and put in Kingston, that's still a player from the 24 class instead of the 23 class. It's still those 2 years. He's going to play a bunch. And so you look at him and you count him. Obviously, Keon Keeley was a very highly ranked player from the 2023 class that was a portal guy who has obviously lived up to that expectation. You could say the rankings look a little bit different if you include like Mylan Graham and guys like that, but like Notre Dame is not a preseason top 5 team because they got Francis Brew, Tion Gray, Mylan Graham, and Quincy Porter. And if those guys didn't come, Notre Dame's 15th, 17th, or 18th, right? I mean, they're still going to be ranked as a top 5 to 6 team without those guys. And it's not even a given that all those guys are going to start, or even half of those guys are going to start. They're all going to play. They're very important parts of it. So you look at it and you're like, okay, this team is preseason top 5 by everybody, not just the Notre Dame guys. But yet when you look at the 2023 class, which right now has the most projected starters on the team, they ranked 12th by 247 Sports, 13th by On3 in their own personal ranking, and then 10th in the On3 consensus rankings. You look at the 24 class, which we think is Marcus Freeman's best so far prior to 2026. That class ranked 10th by 247 Sports, 9th by On3, and then 11th in the On3 consensus. So neither one of those classes were inside the top 10. And if you look at the grades that they gave, they were pretty far away from the top 5. So then you have to ask yourself, how are these two things so different? And then you get into what a lot of people say is, well, it's because Notre Dame's classes and Notre Dame's players are constantly underrated. Then you have to ask yourself, okay, why? Is there a Notre Dame bias or not? And what we can agree on, Trev, is there's a lot of Notre Dame players that are going to start this year that are woefully underrated. Give you a couple other bits of data. Looking at On3, you project Notre Dame's starting lineup. Now, in the starting lineup, I have obviously most of the positions we know. We know what the offensive line is going to be. We know we have Ivan Nias at running back. My receivers are Faison Greathouse and Micah Gilbert. My tight ends, Cooper Flanagan. We know who the DNs are, Onye, obviously, and I have Francis Brew as the 4 starter. Same starting linebackers as last year. And then the secondary, I've got Tay and Adon at safety, Christian Gray at nickel, Leonard Moore at corner, and then DJ McKinney at corner. So if you look at that and you do the rankings, here's a couple interesting things. There's 2 5-stars in the starting lineup, according to On3. Only 1 from 247 Sports. And it's not the same guy. So the 2 5-stars for On3 are Will Black and Gerby Lambert. The 5-star for 247 Sports is Bryce Young. There are 2 5-stars for On3, 14 4-stars, and then 6 starters that are 3 stars or worse, including 2 guys that weren't even ranked by On3, which is a little bit needs some context because Jason Onye wasn't ranked. Neither was anyone, I believe, in that class because On3 hadn't started yet. But everybody else ranked him as a 3-star. They likely would have ranked him as a 3-star. And Jordan Faison didn't even get graded by On3 or 247 Sports. So you look at the overall rankings. If you look at On3, they only have 5 of Notre Dame starters ranked in the top 100. Go beyond that. They only have 5 of their top players in the top 150, and only 7 were even ranked in the top 200. Notre Dame has 9 players that On3 didn't think were good enough to be ranked as top 300 players. Some names of those players. Jordan Faison. Okay, I'll give him a pass. He was a walk-on. All right, not going to hammer him for that. Jason Onye, Aeneas Williams, Cooper Flanagan, Ashton Craig, Francis Brew. Here's where it gets fun. Tay Johnson and Leonard Moore, as long with DJ McKinney. So Notre Dame's secondary has 3 3-stars in it this year in their starting lineup, and only 1 guy in the secondary that ranked in the top 250, and that was Christian Gray. Look at on 247. They have 1 Notre Dame player ranked as a 5-star. They have 6 players ranked as 3 stars and 1 not ranked. That's Jordan Faison. So that would be, 5, 6, 7. That would mean they have 15 4-stars. So they have 1 more 4-star, 1 less 5-star. It's the same number of 4 and 5 stars. So now let's look at it from a top 100 standpoint. They only have 4 Notre Dame players ranked in the top 100. Bryce Young, Will Black, CJ Carr, Gerby Lambert. They only have 4 guys ranked in the top 150. They only have 5 total players ranked in the top 200 coming out of high school. On3 has more Notre Dame players outside the top 300 than they had inside the top 300. Which, again, that's a lot of misses from a recruiting standpoint, Trev. If you're going to try to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, there's not a bias there, then that's a lot of misses. A lot of misses. But that's not the roster. If recruiting rankings matter so much to people, if you're a Stars Matter person, then lower your optimism for this season. If you're someone who believes that rankings are the end-all, be-all to tell us how predictive how guys are going to be because of this percentage of guys that pan out compared to that percentage of guys that pan out, Notre Dame does not have a top 200 quarterback according to On3. So lower your expectations if you're a Notre Dame fan that believes that rankings are the end-all, be-all. Because that's not a roster that's going to stack up with Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama and Oregon and Texas.
That's what I think is fascinating about this conversation, Brian, because we talk a lot about how they're the favorites on FanDuel to go undefeated, and they have the highest odds, or I guess lowest, highest, whichever one you want to argue, to make the college football playoffs this year compared to any other team. It's significant. Best
because I never know which one it is. I don't know if it's highest or lowest. I'm not sure what to say, so I just say best.
Yep, I get you.
Best odds.
That's probably the best way to go about it. But here's the thing. We're talking about an outlet that just ranked their 2026 recruiting cycle as the #1 class in all of college football. but they're not projected to do all those things. They're not top 5 in every way too early that's came out because of the 2026 recruiting class. They're that way because of players like CJ Carr and Tay Johnson and Adon Schuler and Leonard Moore. The list goes on and on and on. And that's what's so fascinating about this conversation, because it's not connecting. So is there a true bias? What's going on here? And that's when you start diving into the individual players, Brian, I think that's where this conversation really starts to separate itself. I mean, you look at the 23 class. Adon Schuler was the 269th player in the country by On3, not ranked by 247 Sports.
Yeah.
That's insane.
The thing about it with Adon, Trev, is them ranking him at 269 was one of the best. 247 had him ranked not in their top 300, and Rivals had him ranked as a 3-star. And I remember talking to a buddy of mine who was working for Rivals at the time. I said, bro, you're going to regret having Adon Schuler ranked where you have him ranked. I'm just telling you right now, you're going to look really dumb when this is all said and done. And so, like, Trev, to answer the question, because I know this is a hot topic with Notre Dame fans, do the recruiting services have an anti-Notre Dame bias? Well, what makes you say that? Well, I don't know. Maybe the fact that one recruiting service had CJ Carr ranked number 232. Maybe the fact that Notre Dame's All-American cornerback, who we ranked as a 4-star with 4.5-star upside, and we undersold him. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm not going to blame everybody else. I undersold that because, again, we didn't see a lot of him his senior year. He was a guy that I thought had a high upside. I said at the time, if I could have seen his senior year, I think I probably would have given him 5-star upside, but wasn't a lot of film available, and he was banged up all year. You have him as a 3-star. You have Tay Johnson as a 3-star. You have Adon Schuler ranked number 269. You have Drake Bowen ranked 212. Jaden Osberg ranked 220. Boubacar ranked 208. And Aeneas Williams not even in your top 300. And CJ Carr ranked 232. So when you look at On3, the first thought is clearly they have an anti-Notre Dame bias. I would say I think On3 has a bias. 247 has a bias. ESPN has a bias. Brian Driscoll has a bias. Trevor Trowbridge has a bias. Chief Brody has a bias. Tommy Guns has a bias. Salty has a bias. Insured by Big has a bias. Everybody has some level of bias in recruiting. You just have to identify what it is. And for me, like, okay, that's what I've had to do over the years. Like, when I miss it on a receiver, I tend to miss on a big, tall guy. Now, I've missed on some shorter guys. I really thought that Xavier Bradshaw kid that was going to go to Virginia Tech was going to be a really good player, and he didn't pan out. But you have to identify what your bias is. As I've studied On3, I think their rankings are genuinely pretty bad. But I think their bias, when it comes to Notre Dame, I haven't noticed a Notre Dame bias. I've noticed bad evaluations, because you could point to On3 and say CJ Carr that low is a joke. Drake Bowen that low is a joke. Tay Johnson in a 3-star is a joke. Leonard Moore's a 3-star is a joke. Everybody except Irish Breakdown had Leonard Moore's a 3-star. Well, actually, there might have been one. I think Rivals might have ranked him. I think Rivals was the only one that also had him as a 4-star, but they didn't have him in their top 300. Let me go look at Leonard real quick. Yeah, they had him as the number 228 player in the country. So Rivals is the only one that got that right, and they're basically now defunct because all their evaluators are gone, and now they're the new Rivals brand is basically the same people that did the On3 rankings. But my counter to that was, and why I've said, as much as I despise On3 and think they're garbage, I don't think that I could say that they have an anti-Notre Dame bias, because there's also been a lot of players that they ranked higher than anybody else. They had Will Black as the number 4 overall player in the country. They had Grayson McHugh this year as a top 10 player nationally. They had Gerby Lambert as a 5-star. They had Anthony Knapp as the number 97 player in the country. They're the only recruiting outlet that got him right, including me. I didn't rank Anthony Knapp that high. I had him as like more of a top 250 to 300 kind of guy with 4.5-star upside. But I would have, if I was doing a ranking the way they did, I would have had him in the 250. Right? Because I do 2. So like 3.5-star with a 4.5-star upside, which is what Anthony Knapp would, in a ranking where you can only give one grade, would have been a 150 to 250 guy for me. They ranked him a number 97 overall. So when you look at some of their misses, I think they miss a lot at linebacker. I think they miss a lot at quarterback. I think they tend to overrate offensive linemen in general. I think they tend to overrate offensive linemen. I think their issue is they have bad evaluations of certain positions, and they put way too much stock onto data that they can't possibly have for 10,000 kids. So, talking with somebody the other day, there was a big-time 2028 player who saw his ranking go way down. And I don't want to say who it was because I don't want to like reveal who I spoke with or whatever, but I'm sure some people could figure it out. But the feedback they got from On3 was, well, we don't have any verified measurables. So a kid that they had watched tape of, ranked as a top 10 player, dropped because they didn't have measurables. Like, okay, now you're taking yourself a little too seriously. There's no way you can have verified measurables for 10,000 high school football players to properly do a ranking. Like, no way. No way. And so it's like when you look at it, it's like if you're going to start doing that stuff, then you're going to continue to have these terrible misses like Leonard Moore being ranked 3. So then the response was, well, hey, we'd love to have him come to one of our camps so we can get an official measurement. Oh, of course you would. You'd love to have him come to your camp. So I think their issue is more process is flawed, and they are bad at evaluating certain positions. I think they had a bias against CJ Carr. I flat out think Charles Powers had some sort of, I don't know what it was, but he had some sort of blinders on for CJ Carr because he made some of the dumbest explanations ever for why he had CJ Carr ranked low. Everybody else had CJ Carr ranked very high. And if anything, I think they all got it wrong still. I had CJ as a 5-star. I think he's proven to be a 5-star. 247 had a number 45. ESPN had him 36, and Rivals had him 50. Those are all fair rankings. I would have had him higher. I would have had him in the top 15 to 20. But that's not a miss. If you had a guy ranked 5th in the top 50 and he turns out to be a top 10 draft pick, you didn't miss. He was just, he reached his upside. That's the reality of it. When you rank a kid who's going to go in the top 10 of the NFL draft and is a preseason Heisman favorite outside of the top 200, that's a really bad flip and miss. And in that same class, I believe, let me look it up real quick. Maybe it was 23 that they had a guy, but like they ranked Sam Levitt at one point in time as a top 100 quarterback, the number 76 player in the country. You're going to rank him in the top 100, but you're going to have CJ Carr outside the top 200. You know what I mean? Like, and you could look at their rankings and they clearly put a lot on tools. They had Jackson Arnold. Remember that year he came out? They had him as a top 10 player. And we said at the time, that's a terrible ranking. I said Nico was overrated coming to high school. We thought Malachi Nelson was overrated coming out of high school. You look at the rankings for their 2023 recruiting class, and it is pretty bad. It was pretty bad. And it wasn't a whole lot better, in my opinion, in 2024 when you look at where they had CJ Carr. I mean, they had CJ Carr. See, here's some names of people they had above CJ Carr. Some are understanding. You had DJ Lagway, Julian Sand. I wouldn't have ranked those guys ahead of CJ, but like they would have been ranked high. Luke Kromanoic, who's now on his 3rd school. Dylan Raiola, Tyler Cherry. I don't even know where he's at now. Walker White, Ryan Puglisi, DeMarcius Davis, Miles O'Neill, who's now battling to be starting quarterback in North Carolina, Ethan Grunkmeyer, Air Noland, Will Hammond, Trey Owens, DeMond Williams, AJ Srirachi. Then you get to CJ Carr. 16th best quarterback in the country. Is that because they have a Notre Dame bias, or do they just suck at evaluating quarterbacks? Based on the rankings of where they've had quarterbacks lately, they suck at evaluating quarterbacks. That's my take. Because I think you could say, well, if they have a Notre Dame bias, then why do they rank so many other Notre Dame players higher than anybody else? There's no reason for them to have jumped Grayson McHugh into the top 10, other than that was just their evaluation. You know what I mean? Like, so I think on 3, I'll give them a pass on the, do you have a Notre Dame bias? And just say they have some bad evaluators. And at certain positions. There's some positions I think they do well. Other positions, I think they're pretty terrible. 247, Trev, a little different story.
Yeah, the narrative changes when you start talking about 247 sports. I'm with you with On Three. I think it's a bad evaluation along with a flawed process. And Notre Dame is just one of the teams, because I'm sure if we dug into it, there's other teams that have kind of suffered in some way or another from On Three recruiting rankings in terms of overall classes and composite rankings. So I think that's fair. 247, on the other hand, this is something you and I were talking about before the show. There have been players that before they committed to Notre Dame were graded out as top 100, top 150, top 200 kids prior to committing to Notre Dame. And then once they committed to Notre Dame for one reason or another, they were all of a sudden outside of the top 200. That I don't fully understand. And that is school specific. That's not specific to the kid. That's not specific. Now, are there outlying circumstances? Sure. Like if you had a kid graded as a top 175 player and then he gets hurt, you can't see him during his senior year, so you have to drop him because other kids rose up in their rankings. Okay, we can talk about that. But when you play and you're fully healthy your junior and senior year and you drop in the rankings because of the school you committed to, that's where you start getting into the anti-Notre Dame bias conversation. You're muted, Brian.
I was looking at my numbers, so I wasn't looking at you giving me the signal.
No worries.
How else do you explain a guy like Mark Zachary, who before he commits to Notre Dame is ranked as the number 58 player in the country, goes out as a senior year, dominates, I believe wins Mr. Football in Indiana, has a way better season than he had the year before, and falls to number 177? Like, what is that? You know what I mean? Like, I just have a hard time with that one. There are some guys they ranked high, but when you look at it, the projected Notre Dame starting lineup this year has 4 guys that were ranked in the top 150. That's it. 4 guys. I have a hard time believing that's just bad evaluations. I really do, Trev. You're going to have a hard time getting me to buy that. I mean,
especially when it's not just against what we believe. When it's opposite of what some of the other, if it's opposite of what On Three and ESPN also believe, when one thing is not like the other, it's like, yeah, that's fishy. I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. On Three, 13 of Notre Dame's 22 starters were ranked as top 300 players. That's a decent amount. Now, there's a lot of guys ranked too low, but overall, that's fine. When you look at On Three, though, they only had 10 of the 22 starters ranked in their top 250, actually top 300, because they had Boubacar ranked number 291. So it just, here's the guys that they had ranked. They had Anthony Knapp as an unranked 3-star. They had Jason Onye's an unranked 3-star. Francis Brew is a different story. Leonard Moore, DJ McKinney, different story because of transfers. They were 3 ranked, unranked 3-star players. Here's the unranked 4-star players. So guys that were not in the top 300. Jaden Greathouse, Micah Gilbert, Jaden Osbury, Don Schuler, Aeneas Williams, and Ashton Craig. All guys that they had as not even good enough to be in their top 300 recruits. Like when I look at ESPN, they have a very clear bias. Southern states and guys that play in their bowl game, in their all-star game. They're going to overhype the heck out of them. And there's some guys that Notre Dame has guys ranked high. It's usually because they're from the South. Their northern guys get dropped. I get that. On Three, I can point to the positions where they continuously miss for Notre Dame. Their DB recruiting or evaluation, in my opinion, is pretty much terrible, unless it's just a no-brainer kid that everybody thinks is good. But they do not do a good job, in my opinion, of finding those type of players. I don't know what their bias is, but they're not good there. They tend to overrate offensive linemen. Okay, so you can understand that. Like, okay, that guy's good. I don't know if he's number 8 player in the country good, but he's a good player. It's not like I've seen a lot of guys that they have ranked in the top 25 that I'm like, dude, that guy's a 3-star. They're bad at linebacker evaluations, real bad. And they're bad at quarterback evaluations. But I honestly, and trust me, I've looked for it because I can't stand On Three. I just don't see a Notre Dame bias there. I really don't. 247 is absolutely a Notre Dame bias. And like even this past year's class, Trev, I mean, like Notre Dame was on track before Rivals folded to having a top 2 class at Rivals, potentially number 1. And obviously they're the number one ranked class in on three. On three had Notre Dame as the number one ranked class in the country last year. So again, can't really say that they have a bias. 247 had ESPN even had Notre Dame's class fourth. 247 had Notre Dame's class ranked sixth last season, Trev, behind Ohio State, Tennessee, Alabama, Oregon, and USC. Like, and here's the thing, their average star rating was even worse. Like, so they were ranked, actually, it was still sixth, but they were barely ahead of LSU, barely ahead of Miami, barely ahead of Georgia, barely ahead of Tennessee. So they were still sixth, even in the average star ranking for 2026. So when I look at their rankings, and it's just the guys that dropped, the guys that they refused to bump up, there were some guys they bumped up, though, Joey O'Brien, but they bumped up Joey O'Brien and Rodney Dunham before those guys committed to Notre Dame, and then it becomes a little obvious. You have, you know what I mean? Like, you praise these guys all summer, how good they are. They dominate this camp, that camp, the other camp. Sometimes, like, you got to be smart enough to say, you know, we can't be that stupid. The other part of it, too, like Grayson McHugh, 147 overall. Ebenezer Otade, 150. Javian Osborne, 191. Like, are you serious? You think Javian Osborne's a borderline top 200 player coming out of high school? Like, are you serious? Now, here's the funny thing. The previous fall, he ranked 79th. When he committed to Notre Dame, he ranked 129th. 135th, excuse me. And then goes out and has a monster senior season, Trev. Monster senior season. So, like, I don't know what film you were missing from Javian Osborne when you look at his ranking. Like, what did you not see in his career where you at one point in time had him ranked as a top 80 player, and then you're going to go out and say, okay, now as a senior, after he rushes for over 2,000 yards and 32 touchdowns, has his best season of his career as a pass catcher, and has, you know, 8.1 yards per carry, best of his career. So as a sophomore, as a freshman, and as a sophomore and as a junior, because he also had a 2,000-yard season as a sophomore, was banged up as a junior. He was in the 6 to 7 yards per carry. Then goes out as a senior year, averages 8.1 yards per carry, and now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he drops over 100 spots. You know, like, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I don't buy that was just, well, we just reevaluated him. Same people doing the evaluation. We just reevaluated him, and you know, we just didn't like him as much, whatever the case may be. I don't buy it. I don't buy it because it happens way too much with 247, way too much. And, you know, Jonas Walton's lowest ranking was his last. At one point in time, in 2024, he was ranked as the number 27 player in the country. Then he dropped into the 120s, commits to Notre Dame. You know, he's you know, drops even further. So there's too much of that, Trev, for me to believe that this is just a coincidence. You know, like, you know, he's not. Bubba Frazier was ranked. Let me find this one. So I got this ranking right here. So Noah Grubbs was once a top 200 player. Commits to Notre Dame. I think the very next ranking after he commits to Notre Dame, he's unranked into the 3-star. January of 25, March of 25, May of 25, June of 25. Every one, he's considered a top 200 player. And then all of a sudden he commits to Notre Dame. And just like that, June, he commits to Notre Dame and he's drops. You know what I mean? Actually committed the year before. Drops. Leads Lake Mary to the state championship. Florida Mr. Football, 3-star. You know what I mean? And that's what's funny, listening to some folks in the media acting like, well, I'm really surprised how good Noah Grubbs is. Why? Did you not watch his film? Did you not watch him lead Lake Mary with a bunch of FCS and low-level FBS guys on the roster to a state championship, like 6A state championship? You know, Bubba Frazier was ranked and then unranked. Caden Finley in January of 2025 was the number 149 player in the country. As a dominant senior season, he's ranked in the top 200 all the way through June, commits to Notre Dame, drops out of the top 250. Like, I just Tyler Merrill ranked as in the top 250 the entire time, drops out in the final ranking. Now, there's some guys they jumped up. Ben Nichols jumped way up, right? I mean, so there are some that will jump up. But for the most part, when you look at this, Trev, it's like I can't. Elijah Golden in January of 2025 was the number 40 player in the country. He is ranked number 113 in July. Number 113 in July. Then goes out and has a senior season where he had something like 40, 50 tackles for loss, almost 20 sacks while leading Cardinal Mooney to a state championship, and he drops all the way down to 222. Like, I'm sorry, I can't buy it. There's a lot more of those stories than Aiden Pouncey jumping way up or Ben Nichols jumping way up. There's a lot more of those stories. And I think a big part of the reason why is I think the person that's the primary driver of rankings has always had a bone up, as you know what, about Notre Dame because, well, I won't get into reasons why, but I think that's a big reason. It's very obvious that 247 has a very strong anti-Notre Dame. And look, some people say, I had somebody on Twitter a couple weeks ago, oh, Tom Loy has nothing to do with the rankings process. Tom covers recruiting. So, like, this isn't like blaming Tom. This isn't blaming Tim Priestern, Tim O'Malley, and the guys that work at Irish Illustrated. This is a 247 national. They have an evaluating arm and a covering recruiting arm. Tom's in the covering recruiting arm. This is the evaluation arm. It's that group. Just before people say, oh, taking shots at Tom Lawyer, Irish. No, I'm not. Those guys have nothing to do with it. So I can't look at that many players dropping year after year and say it's anything other than just a Notre Dame bias. You perennially have Notre Dame's recruiting class ranked lower than everybody else. I can't buy it.
Agreed.
Can't buy it.
And it's when you start getting into the conversation, if it's calculated, Elijah Golden's a good example of that because he didn't commit to Notre Dame until what, August, I believe.
Yep, August.
But when did that recruiting buzz start to come in that he was being crystal balled and all that stuff? July.
Yeah, but even then, there's a lot of people that were reporting that they thought he was going to end up at Oklahoma. Remember that in Alabama? Remember that? There was a lot of buzz in July. Notre Dame fans freaking out about all the buzz about Alabama. Now, because there were, I guess, I don't know, I don't read it, but people were telling me like there's a lot of Bama people and this people saying that it might be them. And I kept saying, guys, here's what I know that you don't know. That the entire time he was on his Alabama visit, he was texting with Al Washington about the visit. Him initiating the conversation. So I was like, guys, he's going to be at Notre Dame. Relax. You know what I mean? But, and then all of a sudden commits to Notre Dame and drops 100 spots despite having an absolute monster senior season. Like, I'm going to try to find his senior year stats because his senior year stats were absolutely ridiculous. Let me find it here real quick, Trev. But yeah, I remember when we were going over it, I was like, this has got to be wrong. And then you start watching their film, and you're like, it's actually not wrong. He was unbelievably good. Yeah, as a junior, he had 61 tackles, 29 tackles for loss, and 10 sacks. That's the film that they saw that made them think that this is a top 100 player. Then as a senior, while leading his team to a state championship where they whooped Jacksonville Bulls, he goes out and has 76 tackles, 39 tackles for loss, and 17 sacks. And he drops 100 spots. Okay. I don't buy it. So that's where I'm at. If you guys want my honest opinion, I think everyone has biases, including myself, including Trev. Everybody does. I think On 3, I would just not waste my time arguing that On 3 has a Notre Dame bias. Now, things may change, but I don't believe that it will. I think their issue is just there are certain positions that I don't put a lot of stock into their evaluation. The other one, 247, I absolutely see a bias. Absolutely. And I think there's more of a Southern bias now as well. now that like Steve Wiltfong's now not at 247 anymore, and Alan True's not at 247 anymore, and those guys kind of got, because those were the Midwestern guys that would get out and see all the Midwestern kids and influence having their rankings being higher. I think you're seeing even more of an anti-Midwestern ranking at 247 in some regards, but I think that this is more Notre Dame specific, in my opinion. ESPN, not anti-Notre Dame in their rankings. They're pro-Southern, they're Hank Williams Jr. If the South would have won, we'd have had it made, right? Like that's the world that they live in when it comes to recruiting rankings. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm at. So people ask, do they have biases? Absolutely. Which is why, as we wrap this segment up, Trev, that's why the 23 and 24 classes ranked 10th and 11th in the consensus rankings, and why 247 had them 12th and 10th. And all, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that was way up. And we said it at the time. I argued nonstop, Trev. You were listening back then, nonstop. This is way too low. There's way too many kids in this class. They've got ranked way too low. These are going to end up being great classes. And we're now seeing it.
Brian, in the next part of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're going to continue with this recruiting topic, but going to get a little bit more granular. And in this part, we're talking about the 2023 recruiting class. Now, we just spent time talking about how they were overlooked and they were underranked coming into college. But you and I are both believers that once you step foot onto a college campus and you are now a part of a collegiate football program, the stars and the rankings and that conversation goes out the window. And now it's about who you are at this place. And that's how we're going to look at this 23 and 24 recruiting class coming up in the next part, is their role for this year. Now, this was Marcus Freeman's first full recruiting class as the head coach. Yeah. 22, he was named the head coach, but he wasn't helping close in that process for the 22 recruiting class outside of
not for offense.
Yeah.
Which is why the defensive class that year was so good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you think about it, Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, Junior Tuihalamaka, Josh Burnham, Jalen Sneed. That was a pretty darn good class, and then the 23 was the first full class where him and Chad Bowden were really driving the bus, so to speak.
100%. And you look at what their role is going to be for this upcoming team. And when you guys are going to understand once we start breaking down the individual players in this class, but it's going to serve as the heart and soul of this team in 2026, because you look at who is in this class, the positions that they're in, not just positions on the depth chart, but positions of leadership and influence on this team. The 2023 recruiting class, Brian, is going to play a major role in the overall success of this team.
Yeah, I think the big thing when I look at this group, first of all, Trev, when we dive into it, just the numbers. As of right now, I think this class will have more starters than any other class of the players that Notre Dame recruited. Now, there's a chance that certain guys may get beat out. Right now, I see 9 starters: Greathouse, Faison, Flanagan, Absher, Traore, Drake Bowen, Jaden Alsbury, Schuler, and Christian Gray. But when I look at this class, the big thing, and the reason that you and I view it as like the heart and soul of this team, is I look at this class and I see this is where your biggest group of leaders comes from. This is sort of your moral compass, so to speak, as a football team, will largely come from this class. When you think of, obviously, you have the first 2-year starters under Marcus Freeman are going to be this season. Drake Bowen and Adon Schuler, both from the 2023 class. You talk about other guys that we view as leaders of this team: Jaden Alsbury, Jordan Faison, Boubacar Traore, are all guys that we've talked about being leaders of either their team or their units. This is where Jaden Greathouse is a guy that we've talked about in the past having some of those traits. Right now, Jaden's just got to focus on kind of getting himself going. But, Cooper Flanagan is kind of taking on a little bit of a leadership role in the tight end room. This is where a lot of your heart and soul is going to come from. Going to be playmakers, and we'll get to that. But if this team is going to be focused, if they're going to be locked in, if they're not going to have the ups and downs that a lot of past Notre Dame teams have had during Freeman's tenure and then before, we're going to look back on a lot of it, and it's going to be the leadership, the focus, the determination that this class brought to the table. Because this class put a lot into when they were coming up. We're going to bring a championship back to Notre Dame. And like everybody kind of says that. But this class drove it big time. And what makes this class a little unique is one of the founding members of that class is now back. And what a lot of people miss, and look, you talk to Drake Bowen, he'll tell you this. Keon Keeley's a big reason why Drake Bowen committed to Notre Dame. Because a lot of people thought, he's from Andrean, he's an Indiana kid. He's not an Indiana kid. He moved here. His family's from the South. I think they're from Texas. Like, you look at his other finalists, it was like Clemson, it was like Auburn, it was like a bunch of Southern teams. It wasn't Notre Dame, Indiana, Michigan State, and Purdue. It was a bunch of Southern schools. And Keon had a big role in that. And then Drake became the leader of that class. And then he's been a leader of the football team ever since. And, you look at Adon Schuler. I mean, I'd be willing to bet you a good steak dinner at Ruth's Chris, Trev, that you could go find a show where Ryan and I are talking about Adon Schuler and talking about how he will be a captain. And I'll be willing to bet you a nice appetizer at that steak dinner that you might be able to find us talking about maybe him being a 2-time captain. That's the kind of kid he was. But I'm confident we talked about he's going to be a captain someday. And there were just guys like that in this class, and they've come to be. But this class spent so much time talking about we're going to restore glory to Notre Dame. And they had a big role, smaller in numbers, but big in importance in 24, that long run they had. And now they're the leaders. They're the heart and soul of this football team. And this team can't reach its full potential without this class kind of finishing off their careers on a high note. And remember, one of the best players from that class has already made a giant mark, and now he's gone. And that's Jeremiah Love. So he's part of this class as well. He had a big role in helping bring this program to where it is now. So even if, Jeremiah doesn't get to benefit from, like, let's say Notre Dame wins the title this year, he won't be able to say, hey, I was on that team, but he will be able to look back and say, I was part of that turnaround. I was part of that buildup to get that program going. And so I think that's what this class was recruited to be. They intentionally looked for those type of players. That's why they loved Drake so much. That's why they loved Adon so much. There were better athletes at safety than Adon Schuler, but those coaches knew. I remember talking to the coaches back then. They were like, this kid is different. They loved Adon because they saw something in him beyond just a football player that they knew he was going to turn out to be this kind of player. Same thing with Drake. And that's why they, and credit to J.D. Bertrand, because the minute Drake showed up, J.D. Bertrand did a great job of kind of putting him under his wing, and helping to mentor him. But they started pushing Drake into a leadership role very early because they knew this is what he had. And so that's why I say, Trev, that this group is going to be the heart and soul of the football team.
I'm with you. You bring up a bunch of good points. I pride myself on having pretty good recall. I don't remember you ever talking about Adon Schuler being a captain. So whenever you want to get that dinner, just let me know.
I mean, I'll find it. I'll find it.
I got good recall, man. I want to save you the time. You're a busy guy. So just whenever that dinner, I'll be up this weekend for practice. So just let me know.
Not happening because I definitely said it. But we still go out to dinner after the show on Saturday. But yeah, I'm not losing the bet though.
No, in all seriousness, the thing that I love about this class is they, outside of like 3 guys, arguably 4 with Kahanu Kia, but outside of Ashton Craig, Jalen Sneed, and Jason Onye, they've grown the most with Marcus Freeman as a head coach. They were there in 2023 when, they had Tyler Buckner leave the program. They had a transfer portal quarterback come in. They were there for the heartbreaking loss to Ohio State where there was a lot of lessons learned. They were there for that just head-scratching loss against Clemson. They were part of that. They were a part of the big win at Texas A&M. And that 24 season, to your point, is where they started to step into the limelight a little bit, where they needed to be the guys. 24 was the first year Drake Bowen was a starter. That's when Jaden Greathouse started to emerge. That's when Jeremiah Love became RB1. And so that's
Boubacar steps into the,
yes.
he gets hurt, but he was a factor. Jaden Osbury was a very important part of that team. Christian Gray was a starter on that football team. Jordan Faison was a starter on that team. Jaden Greathouse was a starter on that team. Cooper Flanagan was a very important blocker on that football team. Charles Jagasol, was expected to be that guy because we'll talk about him a little bit later, but the 23 class started to make their presence felt early at Notre Dame. And as you said, you already mentioned Jeremiah Love, who certainly had a bit of a breakout season in 2024, I would say.
Something like that.
A little bit.
Yeah. Something like that. But it's the thing that I love about this class is they've grown the most with Freeman as a head coach. A lot of the bumps that he experienced on the way to where he's at now, this class was a part of that. And whether it was in the starting lineup, it was as a rotational guy, whether it was being felt in practice or on Saturdays. That's why I have a lot of confidence, and I know you do as well, by talking about how this class is going to be the foundation of this team, and they're going to go where this class takes them. We'll get into the 24 class here a little bit later, but there's a lot of players in this 23 recruiting class that they're going to be relied on. Like you already brought up, potentially the most starters on this roster on offense and defense are going to come from this class as well.
Yeah, you have starters, but then also you have rotation players. Now, look, the older classes some of those players end up they're gone. Some of those guys are gone. Obviously, some guys transfer, some go to the NFL, right? I mean, Jeremiah Love, he's off to the NFL. Braylon James transferred after a year. Kenny Minchie just transferred. Just kind of going through it. Rico Flores transferred. So, I mean, Micah Bell transferred. So, there's some guys that are gone from this class. Ben Minnick just transferred. Joe Otting was in this class. He was an important piece last year. They're an injury away from him, again, being a very important part to what they're trying to do. Sam Pendleton was a starter on the 2014 for a while. Armel Mukam, does he have a bit of a breakout? So Chris Tarrick is in this class. KK Smith was in that class. So the point is, Trev, it's not just the starters. There's plenty of impact in the two deep for this. Sullivan Absher was in that class. We've talked about how his emergence could arguably be the most important emergence of all 5 offensive linemen that we project to be in the starting lineup, because if he's your 5, right, he determines your floor and in a lot of ways. So this class is going to be super important. And there's a lot of those Sullivan Absher types in this class. The Sullivan Abshers, Chris Tarricks, Joe Ottings, even Drake Bowen to a degree, and Jaden Osbury to a degree, are very blue collar. How I define blue collar for football, Jaden Osbury doesn't talk a whole lot. He's not flamboyant. He's not on social media all the time. He doesn't, shoot, Trev. He's at a press conference a couple weeks ago, and up with the Notre Dame media up top, and nobody talks to him. Nobody asks him a question, which made Trevor's night easy because Trevor was supposed to transcribe it, and part of that is he's just kind of an overlooked figure who's also been incredibly productive the last 2 years at Notre Dame. And it's there was I can't remember if it was in the chat or on the board, but I had to literally was kind of debating with someone who didn't believe me when I said that Jaden Osbury was their starting will linebacker last year. No, he wasn't. Yeah, he was. He was the starting linebacker for the last 10 games of the season. He was 3rd on the team last year in tackles last season. Last 2 years, Jaden Osbury has had, 109 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks the last 2 years on a couple pretty darn good defenses. There's a lot of those kind of players in this football team. Even a kid like Brennan Vernon, who had every reason in the world to transfer from Notre Dame. And he's sticking it out. He wants to get his degree. He's still part of the team. He could have taken a medical red shirt and just focus on his degree. But look, if you need me to run scout team O-line, I'm going to run scout team O-line. There's just a lot to this class, Trev, that to me gives it its heart and soul when we talk about the foundation for building a championship roster. And it can't be overlooked how important this class has been to Marcus Freeman's rise. It's really important at a place like Notre Dame that first recruiting class you put together is a hit. So far, it's been a hit to a certain degree, but is it a hit? Is it hit enough for them to accomplish the goals that they set for themselves, which is we want to bring a natty back to Notre Dame? That's the final question. But one thing you can say for sure, this was certainly, Trev, they have certainly produced better than the number 12 overall ranked class in the country, according to 247, or 13th, according to On3. Far surpassed that. There's no question about that.
Oh, without a doubt. It goes back to the conversation that we just had that it was grossly underrated. We thought that at the time. You thought at the time. I mean, even before I was on Irish Breakdown and doing what I do now, I thought it was a grossly underrated class. That's the thing. I mean, look, the other thing I love about this class too, Brian, kind of before we get into like the individual roles that they're going to play on this upcoming team is they kind of embody what Marcus Freeman, when he was hired, talked about, the gold standard, and you hear him break it down every practice, TGS, gold standard. What does that mean? And it's, challenge everything, competitive spirit, things like that. And I think this class embodies that. Challenge in this day and age of the transfer portal and NIL, a lot of those guys have reason to leave. And it's not just the Brennan Vernons. We've talked on the show before about how Don Schuler every offseason gets offered a bag to leave Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Christian Gray gets offered a bag to leave Notre Dame. It's rare that you have guys stick around. They challenge the idea of what this day and age of college football is. Competitive spirit. You want to talk about that? They just brought in the number 1 ranked recruiting class. We're getting ready to talk about the 2024 recruiting class. But you have to be some type of level of competitor to still remain and hold on to the positions that they have on this football team when you have guys like CJ Carr coming in, a Leonard Moore coming in. And that's what I love about this class is they embody the culture of what Marcus Freeman wants his program to be, top of everything else that we talked about. But that being said, Brian, there are some things that they still have to do. And there's a different level that this class is going to have to get to, albeit they've already done a spectacular job. But another level is needed if this team wants to reach a national championship. And we'll start with the offensive side of the ball. And you're going to need some playmakers out of this class on offense. And that's where we start.
Big keys for this 2023 class, Trev, and as we look at their impact on the 26 football team is you need the offensive playmakers to step up and take hold of being that guy. You need them to step up and say, hey, Jaden Greathouse, we need you to be that guy. I don't care if you're the number 2 receiver, the number 1, the number 4, whatever. When you're on the field, you got to be locked and loaded, brother, and we need you to be that guy consistently and stay healthy, whether it's for 20 snaps a game or 60 snaps a game. Jordan Faison, you showed last year you can be a baller, but we need you to kind of become that guy that a lot of people think that you can be, that number 1 guy, that impact player that does more than just make an impact on stops and comebacks and hitches and slants and things like that. That you can become that difference maker, big play guy that honestly, 2 of the best games he ever had. This is what's wild about these 2 kids. I would argue that 2 of the 3 best games that Jordan Faison has ever played, not just statistically, but also impact, were postseason games. The Sun Bowl in 2023 and then the Indiana game. He was dynamic against Indiana in 2024. And I thought and I think the Georgia game was one of his top 5. He just didn't get the ball as much, but like when he got the ball, he had clutch plays in that game, blocked well in that game. And then there's no question that the 2 best games that Jaden Greathouse ever played were in the college football semifinals and the college football national championship game. So I think it's amazing that if you look at the 2 best games that these 2 kids have played, you could argue that all 4 of them, so 2 for each kid, were postseason games. Well, but now you got to make sure you're doing what you need to do in the regular season so that you're in position to be in the postseason and make that run. And you need that. And look, Cooper Flanagan also, Travis, stepping into that kind of that role this year offensively, where you've got to be able to make your presence felt a little bit on offense this season. You need to be a guy that can go out there, and I don't need you to be Mitchell Evans from 2023. I don't need you to be Tyler Eifert. I don't need you to be Michael Mayer, but I need you to be a factor and be a clutch player, be a red zone weapon, be a chain mover, be a great blocker. I think Cooper Flanagan is a very underrated and not talked enough about piece to this offense this year. He and James Flanagan, member of the 25 class, are going to be instrumental in making sure that the run game doesn't miss a beat despite losing Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. How do you not miss a beat when you lose those 2 guys? It's not that they're as good. It's that they're the best players they can be. Aeneas and Kedron and, Nolan James and Javian Osborne and Jonas Walton, those kind of guys. But it's more so they're playing behind an elite offensive line. And part of an elite offensive line in the run game has to include the tight ends. And I think that's one area where I'm I'm as confident as as if there's one thing that if I'm putting like my 5 things that I'm absolutely confident are going to happen this year, one of those things absolutely is the tight end blocking in the run game is going to be a lot better this year. And Cooper Flanagan's a big piece of that. But he can't just be that. He's also got to give you something in the throwing game. It'll be different than what we saw with Eli Raridan, but he's got to give that to you. And I think he's a very important – his emergence and staying healthy this year is going to be a very important piece to just how much impact can this class make on the Notre Dame offense this year.
Oh, agreed completely. Echo everything that you said about both Faison and Greathouse. For Cooper Flanagan, can you be reliable in the offense? We talk a lot about the ceiling of James Flanagan, how he could be the next guy. We're all excited for Ian Premer to get on campus. Is this a year that Ty Washington or Jack Larson make the jump? Preston Frizzell is he's a little ways away from kind of being that impact guy. But can Cooper Flanagan, in a room right now that's kind of up for grabs, become reliable in every sense? When you talk about playmakers on offense, it's not just about who's the number one go-to target on the team. Being reliable is in both the run and the pass game. When 87 is on the field, can you trust that he's going to be able to do his job every single snap? And that's what's in front of him. That's also being a playmaker on offense. It just looks different when you're talking about the tight end position. Some games, it's like what Eli Raridan did against Miami. It's having 4 catches for almost 100 yards. Other games, it's what Tommy Tremble did, where he could end a game with 1 catch for 4 yards, but he was the best blocker on the field that day. And so if that's what Cooper Flanagan does, that's going to be his impact. And that's also becoming a playmaker on this offense. And they're going to need those 3 guys from the 23 class to step that up. I'm with you completely. Let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. There's some key players in this class that are going to be vital for success in the front 7. Absolutely vital.
You could survive and still be a really good offense this year if Greathouse and Faison don't become those guys or get hurt, because you have such depth there. You have the 24 class. For the people that aren't really paying enough attention to Cam Williams right now, there's a couple clips that have come out of lately from Cam Williams at practice, but you got Micah Gilbert, you got Elijah Burris, you've got Bubba Frazier, and then of course the 2 Ohio State transfers. Like, there's a world in which you could survive without those 2 guys really taking that jump. It'd be harder. Defensively, you can't be an elite defense without this class. It is so important. And yes, the heart and soul part we talked about, right? 2 captains coming back, Drake Bowen and Don Schuler. But this group, it's not even just about that. It's about your best pass rusher is supposed to come from this class. Your 2 starting linebackers come from this class. Your team captain at safety comes from this class, and you need Christian Gray, who we'll talk about in a second, to come from this class. But like in the front 7, Trev, you really need the 23 signees that are starting to be that guy. You need Boubacar to become that kind of game-changing edge rusher that can put a team on his back and say, hey, we got this on defense. He's got the ability to do that. He showed flashes of it last year. Now it's about taking his game to that level. Can you be that elite, that top level, day 1, day 2 type of draft pick at defensive end? Can you be that? Drake Bowen, it's like, look, man, you've been really good the last 2 years. Is that just who you are, or is there another level for you? Honestly, Trev, if all we see from Drake this year is what he was the last 8 games, 7 games last year, all right, that's fine. But it would be even better if you could kind of get that final piece to it. Jaden Alsbury, dude, keep doing what you're doing. But in the front 7, this class is going to be very important. And then there's another guy that we talk about, Trev, or that we haven't talked a lot about. Can Armo Mukum finally play to his potential this season and step into the lineup and say, hey, so it was funny. The way that we do rankings at IB for new people is we have 2 rankings. There's a ranking of where you are right now, and then you have an upside ranking. Well, when I did my defensive rankings for the 23 class, I had Boubacar Traore and Armo Mukum both pretty low in the rankings, but they were 1-2 in the upside rankings. I had Boubacar 1 and Armel 2, because it was like, look, if it clicks for them, they're going to be studs. Well, Boubacar, it's already starting to click, and I think we said this a couple weeks ago, Trev. Boubacar's 2025 is what he would have done in 2024 if he wasn't injured. He'd have been 10 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. And then last year would have been that breakout year. And honestly, selfishly, it sucks for Boubacar, but it ended up helping out Notre Dame. Because if Boubacar doesn't get hurt in 2024, I don't think he's at Notre Dame in 2026. I don't. I think he would have taken over and had a, like I said, double-digit tackle for lost season, 6, 7, 8 sacks, and then he would have come out last year and been a dude, and he might be in the draft right now. But now it's kind of become that guy. No more the flashy guy. You've always had the pass rushing tools, improved as a run defender last year. Now it's time to really take your game to another level and become that star that we think he's capable of being. Same thing with Armel Mukam. I don't think the pressure's not on Armel like it is on Boubacar, but it's kind of like if it clicks for him, though, he has a very different skill set than a lot of guys on the D-line that they have right now. And he could be a major game changer for Notre Dame if he can step up and it can just click for him. So I think this class is going to be incredibly important. This defense cannot reach its full potential if this group in the 23 class does not play to its potential this season. Front seven, and then again also on the secondary, especially with Christian Gray.
Christian Gray is a player that has quickly worked his way up in the ranks of being one of the more polarizing players to talk about amongst the Notre Dame fan base. Some of it I understand. The other part of it, some people might just be off the reservation with Christian Gray and evaluating his overall performance. He's not a 50-50 player. You want to talk about things that we know to be true as of right now, that is one of those things. Christian Gray is not a 50-50 player, but in the life of a corner, that 5%, that 5 to 7%, it's a glaring mistake. And so for some of those things, if Christian Gray can take that next step to becoming an all-around elite cornerback, and that includes him stepping up at the nickel, if that ends up being his home and he can maximize that potential of that position, he has the opportunity to be the best nickel that Notre Dame has had under Marcus Freeman. And they didn't have to go to the portal to get one. That's huge. That's huge for recruiting. That's huge for the team this season. It's huge for building camaraderie within the recruiting class. But if Christian Gray can step up and solidify the back end of this defense, because there's a lot of things that we're taking for granted, and some of it I understand completely with this secondary. Leonard Moore is the best cornerback in the country. I don't know if you can take anything more for granted than that. He has one side of the field locked up. He's good to go. Notre Dame has the best safety tandem in the country. One of those two players is in the 2023 class, and the other one is in the 24 class we're getting ready to talk about. Christian Gray is kind of almost some like to paint him as the wild card for this secondary in the back end. There's a lot of people that are just assuming DJ McKinney walks in and becomes a starter at field. Well, what if over the course of the offseason, Christian Gray's ceiling isn't as high at nickel than what Dallas Golden's is, and then they kick him back out the field? You have a 2-year starter stepping in at field, but he needs to take that next step to fully complete this. He's like that missing piece in the puzzle that if he takes that one final step, Christian Gray is going to be one of the best corners in the country alongside Leonard.
Yeah. There's no question. There's zero question that he's got to put it all together. Yes, they've got depth there that if he doesn't, they've got guys they can put in there. But the reality is, Trevor, is the good version of Christian Gray is outstanding. He's just not that version enough. I'm watching the clip. I'm trying to remember what game it was, Trevor. I was watching a play where he got run by, and it was in. I'm trying to think what game it was. It might have been USC. No, it's Texas A&M game. And you see it. He's in perfect phase, and then he just lunges and tries to grab a guy. No confidence in himself. And you're like, dude, if you'd have just stayed in phase, you were fine. That guy was not running away from you. But the minute you lunge, you could see his stride gets jacked up. He starts kind of stumbling, and then boom, the guy runs by him. It's stuff like that. And if he can cut that stuff out and just trust himself, he's a difference maker in this defense. Go back to the 24 season, because it seems like all people want to talk about in 2024 is getting beat late by Jeremiah Smith in the USC game. Like, do we forget how good he was against Texas A&M? Are we going to forget the two huge plays he made against USC, even in the game where he wasn't playing well, the 4th down stop? Are we going to forget how good he was against Penn State? Not only the game-winning interception, but remember that huge 3rd down tackle he made that I think forced Penn State into a field goal in that game, a field goal attempt in that game. I think that's what happened. But it's just one of those things, Trev, where he's made a ton of big plays at Notre Dame, a ton of big plays, but it's those bad plays that get him in trouble. And he's going to have to avoid that, because look, you're going to have I'm confident saying they're going to have one of the three best. Just be conservative. They're going to have a top 3 to 5 safety tandem in the country. Like, just being conservative, not even trying to get into is it number 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5. It's in the top 5. Just leave it at that. They've got the best cornerback in the country coming back, and that's not our opinion. He was a unanimous All-American last year. And he was a freshman All-American the year before, and there's people that say if he'd have come out in this draft class, he'd have been a top 10 to 12 draft pick. Like, that's not our opinion. That's national people. The difference between a really good secondary and an elite secondary is what happens at nickel and the field corner. Wherever Christian is, he has to do his part to lock that down and say, we're going to be really good here too. And if he can do that, that changes the dynamic of this football team in a big way, Trev, in a very big way. And, again, I look at him and I say, sometimes kids just are what they are, and they don't make that jump. They hit that ceiling, whether it's as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, whenever. They just hit that ceiling, and everybody reaches that point at some point in time. There comes a point in time where you're never going to be better than you are at this stage in your career. Like, you can go back all the greats in football, basketball. There were times when it's like, okay, this is the best John Elway ever was. This is the best Larry Bird ever was. This is the best Barry Larkin ever was. This is the best Ken Griffey Jr. ever was. Those are some of my favorite players as a kid. And then once you hit that peak, the only way to go is eventually down, or you just stay there for a few years. With Christian Gray, the question is, has he reached his peak? Is this just who he is? Talented playmaker, but just not consistent enough, and you've got to protect a little bit? Or is there another level for him? And that's what we have to find out this season. A question was raised in the chat. Apparently, my buddy Tim O'Malley brought this up in his podcast about whether or not he's physical enough for the nickel. I have no doubt about that if he's healthy. The only question I have about Christian Gray is his health. I can understand why someone would raise that question because we remember the Texas A&M game. We remember some other games. But Christian Gray in 24, before his shoulder gave out late in the year and then now into this year, he was a very physical player, very good tackler, could come up and hit people. I also don't think the nickel has to be like a rover in the perimeter run support. The way that Notre Dame defends the run, they're going to either force back inside or spill with the D end. That's their force player on the edge. Whereas in the 4-2-5 that they ran under like Mike Elko and Clark Lee, that rover was kind of that force player. That's not how they ask their nickel to play. That doesn't mean he can just get driven off the ball, but that's not a concern for me with Christian when he's healthy. That's the question. Is his shoulder just kind of – because sometimes, Trev, you know this, when your shoulder goes, it goes. Sometimes that's just the way it is. Is that the deal with Christian? I don't know the answers to those questions, but that will ultimately be what determines it, because I could give you 100 clips from 24 and parts of 25, but especially 24, where it's like, okay, there's no doubt in my opinion that he can handle that. And not just coming up and hitting somebody, which is important, but taking on blocks, being physical at the point of attack, shedding blocks, getting to the ball carrier. Those things are more important than will you run downhill with a 10-yard head start and hit somebody. It's will you stick your nose in the mix and can you be physical taking on a block and then getting off of a block? Those are things that we'll kind of have to see from him consistently. But when he's healthy, and when I say healthy, I don't mean like when he's not bumps and bruises. I mean when he doesn't have basically a bum shoulder with a giant brace on it, he's been pretty good in that area. So it's not a huge concern of mine, Trev. And, just briefly kind of talk about this. It's not just the starters. We mentioned it. There's a lot of two deep impact in this class, but there's one, in my opinion, giant, enormous wild card from the 2023 class, and that's Charles Jagasaw. If Charles Jagasaw is healthy in the past couple years, we're having a very different conversation about the 2023 recruiting class. Very different conversation.
Agreed. The conversation of it being overlooked and underrated, I think, gets furthered with Charles Jagasaw being able to stay healthy. And I mean, even in the small sample size that we've gotten to see him in, the bowl game against Oregon State, the national championship against Ohio State, half of a game in the Orange Bowl against Penn State. He's made his impact felt. I mean, Brian, and I understand why. I don't know if I've seen a player get more hype than Charles Jagasaw, having never played a regular season game and only seeing him in 2.5 games, one of those being the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl, than Charles Jagasaw. And I get it. Dude's a freak. He's 6'5". Well, depending on the roster that you look at, he's anywhere from 6'5" to 6'7", and he's over 330 pounds. One of the most physically gifted offensive linemen on the entire roster. But I'm with you. Biggest wild card. And his outlook on the future at Notre Dame is still uncertain. Does he come back healthy for this year? Does he make a push at any time in the season? I personally am not in the category of players that the second that he's just medically cleared, he is now going to be Notre Dame starting right guard and kick Sully Absher to the curb. I'm not in that faction of the fan base. But at some point over the next 2 years, does he make a push for the starting lineup again if he's healthy and he picks up where he left off? Potentially. And I'm with you. He's a huge, huge wild card, and I'm very interested to see what it is. I mean, without Charles Jagges on the starting lineup, they're still projected to win the national championship and go undefeated on.
And
without somebody,
should have a very, very, very good offensive line. No question.
Without him,
So-
that's interesting.
I haven't seen the article or the interview, but I had a couple people tell me that I guess Charles Jagasaw said something to, I believe, John Bryce. A buddy of mine texted me, talk to John Bryce about talking about how he'll probably be back like early in the season, like healthy in practice. Probably not like for the opener, but at some point in time during the season, he'll get cleared, sort of like an earlier version of what happened in 2024. Then the question is, then what do they do with him? I would assume that at that point in time, it just depends on how the line is playing. If there's like if Sullivan Absher's cooking and Anthony Knapp's cooking and everybody's healthy, I'd say work him into the rotation. Let him get his sea legs underneath him in practice, and then maybe put him in the goal line offense when he's fully cleared. Let him be like when you go 13 personnel, instead of having James Flanagan attached to one side and Cooper Flanagan attached to the other, maybe you put Jags on one side, James Flanagan on the other, and then Cooper's your movement piece in sort of a big 13 big personnel. Things like that where you get him on the field on top of maybe some PAT field goal, things like that, and just see how he holds up. But then if there's an injury or he's just in practice dominating, then you've got a shot to put him in the game. But like, I just don't want to get my hopes up that he's going to come back and be the Charles Jagasaw we saw, in the Penn State game, the Ohio State game, or the Oregon State game, because he's been out of football so much the last 2 years. And when I mean out of football, just not practicing. This isn't a situation where he redshirted just because they wanted to save a year and he was practicing every. This isn't like Will Black last year where he didn't play much in games, but he was still at practice every day and all that. This is a kid who literally took 0 snaps of offensive line play the entire season. 0 snaps in practice or anything. Who hasn't bench pressed in almost what we're in April, and his injury was last July. So 9 months. He hasn't squatted once, deadlifted, like benched or anything like like those are all very legitimate things we have to ask ourselves. But if Charles Jagasaw somehow is able to come back and at the very least just be a rotation offensive lineman that's ready to step in if somebody goes down, or if somebody's struggling can step in, this line is ridiculously good. He's a wild card because it's not even that just he didn't play, folks, but we don't know what his strength is going to be like. We don't know what the stability of the bone is going to be like. We don't know what kind of nerve damage did or didn't, happen. We don't know if he's going to come back with the same football instinct since he's played. So there's just so many questions that it just makes it hard to really know for sure what that's going to be.
Always got to hope for the best with the player in Charles Jagasaw's situation, but I am very curious to see what happens when he does come back, what that's going to look like and what Notre Dame does with him. Real quick, Brian, there are some players from the 2023 class that do have the opportunity to make an impact elsewhere, not just on Notre Dame's roster, which is what we'll talk about.
It's going to be fun. And honestly, Trev, this is probably a year where I'll pay attention more to guys that left than I ever have. I don't really – some kids I've had a relationship with I'll pay attention to, but for the most part, I mean, we're just so busy. I don't really think about the kids that have left, but that's going to be a little bit different with this 23 class because there's some kids that I think did it the right way, came, worked hard, battled, and then, didn't have that opportunity. And then they left, and I'll be rooting for them. And plus they're good kids. You look at obviously Jeremiah Love in the NFL, but then you've got Kenny Minchie's going to be starting quarterback in Kentucky. I can't wait to see what he does at Kentucky this year. Really want to see what KK Smith does at Michigan State. Obviously, Preston Zinner at Rice, Ben Minnick at Miami of Ohio. Then a couple other guys that have a shot to make an impact. Rico Flores transferred to UVA. How will he do? And then Sam Pendleton, obviously starting center for Tennessee this year, who's a preseason top 25 team. So this class will be making an impact far beyond just who's on the Notre Dame roster. It's going to be making an impact in a lot of teams for a lot of teams in college football in 2024. 26, excuse me.
Ryan, in the final part of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We just got done talking about the 2023 class and the role that they're going to have on this team in 2026. Let's talk about the 24 class that we're also filing into the very underrated, grossly underrated by major recruiting services when they were coming in. But like we've talked about before, the second you step foot on a college campus and you become a part of a college football program, I don't really buy into the recruiting rankings anymore, especially when you get to the level that this 2024 recruiting class is in. Now, 23 class, we believe to be the heart and soul of this team. They're the culture drivers. They've been with Marcus Freeman the longest, but this 2024 class, that's when you start to enter the conversation of star power. And not to slight anybody in the 23 class, but when you start breaking down who's in this 2024 recruiting cycle, the vision becomes a little bit clearer. The star power comes from this class.
It does, Trev, and it's not really close. I mean, look, the 23 class is vitally important, and there's some big-time football players in that class. Your best defensive lineman is probably in the 23 class. Arguably your two best linebackers from a starting production standpoint from that class. We'll see with Kingston as he comes back from an injury. But I don't know that you could debate that the highest ceiling linebacker isn't from that class. You look at just the impact players that are in that class. I mean, you need the leadership. You need the heart and soul. You need that moral compass that the 23 class provides. But then and there's playmaking in that class, as we mentioned, offensively, Jay Greathouse, Jordan Faison. But there's a different level of elite player in the 24 class that's on this roster. Here's some of just the starters from the 24 class. And I won't include Francis Brew and Tion Gray, who were transfers that are also part of the 2024 class. We're just going to look at, same with Mylan Graham. We're just going to look. So like 24 class from a bigger picture national, if we included transfers, it adds even more because it's Mylan Graham, Francis Brew, and Tion Gray. But when you look at it, Trev, it's Bryce Young, it's CJ Carr at quarterback. It's Anthony Knapp at left guard. It's Gerben Lambert at right tackle. Three guys that we've mentioned at different points in time in the past have All-American potential. Your starting running back is likely going to come from this class. And if it wasn't for an injury, your starting running back may still come from this class, but it won't be the guy that we're talking about when Aeneas Williams. It could be Keidron Young. How does he come back from an injury? You look at on the defensive side of the ball, Tay Johnson, Bryce Young, Kingston Viliama-Asa. And, oh, by the way, there's that Leonard Moore kid out at cornerback. Yeah, he's a decent player. He's okay. He might be able to help him out a little bit this year. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, it's a 3-star kid, but, every now and then, a 3-star kid can help you out a little bit, but this is your star power, Trev, right? Like we do a show pre-spring. We'll do one again before, probably in fall, over the summer, some point in time, maybe early in fall camp, where we're going to talk about how important who's the star power for this football team. And when you look at Notre Dame, this class is riddled with it. This is where a lot of your star power comes from. Who's the returning unanimous All-American? It's him. PFF has 3 Notre Dame players ranked as the top returning player in the country at their position. It's Leonard Moore, Tay Johnson, and Kingston Viliama-Asa. All 3 2024 kids. All 3 in the 2024 class. I believe, Trev, that CJ Carr is still top 3 when it comes to Heisman odds from FanDuel. He's from the 24 class. we've mentioned that we think there's 2 offensive linemen that have chances to be All-Americans this year for Notre Dame, both from the 2024 class, Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert. And as talented as Boubacar Traore is, we could debate whether or not it's Bryce Young, a member of the 2024 class, that has the highest ceiling at defensive end in raw talent. Micah Gilbert's a guy that a lot of people are talking about as a breakout candidate. And then, there's some other guys we'll kind of get into, Trev, as we dive deeper into this. But this is a class, Trev, that this is where you hope your impact talent comes from. This is where you hope that you see this team kind of say, okay, we knew you were good. Now you're going into year 3. Now you're juniors now. Now it's everybody's in a returning system. So like the 23 class kind of missed a chance to really take that junior season jump because they were making a transition from the Al Golden defense into the Chris Ash defense, which is very different in certain ways. But that's not the case for the 24 class going into their junior seasons. It's definitely not true for the offense. These guys are now all going into their 3rd season in the same exact offense. They haven't played under anything else. I think that's going to be huge in a way that the 23 class could not benefit from on defense last season. It's a different animal now. And so when you look at it, Trev, and you think about like just the star power in this class, right now we project to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players from this class in the starting lineup that was recruited by Notre Dame out of high school. It's actually one more when you count that they have a transfer from that class and could end up having a couple transfers from that class, maybe 3 transfers from that class end up starting if Tion Gray and Francis Brew and Mylan Graham all end up starting. So just overall, 8 players from this class that were recruited out of high school will be starting for Notre Dame. And between the 2, we project 17 players that were recruited by Notre Dame out of high school in those classes to occupy the 22 starting spots on this team. But this is where your dudes come from. This is where your elite level talent comes from. This is where a bigger chunk of your All-Americans might come from this season. It's the 24 class. So 23, heart and soul, leadership, moral character, and playmaking. 24, emerging leadership, but that's not your number one goal. Your number one goal is you got to be a dog. And that's what this class is going to provide. And I think that balance between the 2 is partly why I'm so excited about this team. And it's not bad. It's a lot of playmakers, Trev, for a class that on 3 thought was the 11th, best class in the country from a consensus standpoint, and 247 thought was the 10th overall in their own rankings. It's pretty darn good for a group that couldn't sniff the top 5 nationally in rankings coming out of high school.
Yeah, that's definitely not too shabby for a bunch of overlooked guys. The thing that I love about these 2 classes is they mesh so well together. But the 24 class is what takes this roster from being great to elite. That's the big set. Like, look, if Notre Dame came into the season and the core pieces that they were relying on this year were Drake Bowen, Adon Schuler, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, Sullivan Absher, players like that, it's like, that is a really good roster. That's a playoff caliber roster. The conversation changes when to those players you add CJ Carr, Gerby Lambert, Anthony Knapp, Leonard Moore, Tay Johnson. That with just the players from the 23 class, and then obviously the remnants of the 21, 22, and then obviously what you have from the 25 class, potentially 26. That is a top 10 to 15 roster in college football. It's this class that takes it to that next level. And you mentioned something, Brian, that I love is the role of this group. You have possible captains. Like in no way would it surprise me in the slightest if CJ Carr was your captain this year. One of
or Leonard Moore.
Or Leonard Moore.
Or Anthony Knapp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It would not shock any of us if they were the captains, but that's not a necessity. You don't need them to have good core leadership. And because of the 23 classes journey together, tied with their journey with Marcus Freeman, they can just go out and focus on ball And that's a real dangerous conversation when you start talking about, oh, you're just going to let
is.
CJ Carr go out and focus on football.
It is.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's nuts.
we talk about the 8 starters, Trev, from this class that Notre Dame recruited out of high school again, because it's 9 technically, could be up to 11. Think about that. Half the starting lineup could be 2024 players if we include Francis Brew, and if both of Tion Gray and Mylan Graham win starting jobs. I was like completely drawing a blank on Mylan Graham. I've said his name 3 times in the last 10 minutes. I was drawing a blank on it, which is just absolutely bonkers. But as I kind of look at it and I look at this class, man, dude, there's some dudes in this class that if they continue to pan out are going to be making a lot of money on Sundays. Like when we talk about, when people ask us in the chat, how, Notre Dame's going to have X number of guys drafted next year. And I'm like, yep, that's going to come from this class, but then the other part of it too is it's not just the 8 starters. I mean, here's some guys from the 2024 class that we're not even including when we talk about the percentages of starting lineup. We're not talking about Kingston Viliamasa. We're not talking about Cam Williams. We're not talking about Keidron Young. We're not talking about Logan Thomas. We're not talking about Styles Prescott, who could be in the 2 deep. We're not talking about Logan Saldate, who could be in the 2 deep. We're not talking about Peter Jones, who's having his best spring so far. We're not talking about Jack Larson, who's having his best spring so far. And Cole Mullins, who's a guy that's really an up and coming player. Like there's a lot of these guys, especially like the high level guys like Kingston and potentially Cam Williams, that aren't even really included in this. And if Keidron Young can get back to full speed and kind of get locked in and focused, then man, like, dude, this class is going to be even crazier. But you can't win a title without the leadership and the backbone and the foundation that the 23 class provides. But you also can't win a championship without the big-time playmaker, those dogs that, like, hey, when you're playing against Ohio State and Oregon and Texas and Georgia and teams like that, you're not taking a backseat to anybody talent-wise. Why? It's largely because of this class. Here's a crazy thought, Trev. You could make an argument that the most talented player at each position on this football team, except for one position, comes from the 2024 class. Bear with me here. You could argue that the most talented player on the roster, I mean, quarterback's an easy one, CJ Carr. You could argue that one of Aeneas or Keidron Williams is your most talented, or let's say this, most talented or productive player at each position will come from this class. Quarterback, it's both. Running back, it's productive, maybe most talented, because I still say a healthy Keidron Young might be your most talented running back. Wide receiver, I think I would make a case that Cam Williams is your most physically gifted player in this class. And I know some people inside the Goog that would make the case that it's Micah Gilbert. And if you're not going to be one of those two, then the argument's most likely going to be Mylan Graham, who's also from the 24 class, but he doesn't count for this conversation. He does, but we're making a different point. Offensive line, Gerby or Anthony Knapp. I think it's Anthony Knapp. I mean, Gerby Lambert. I don't think it's a big debate. I think it's Gerby. With all due respect to Will Black, maybe his time will come, but right now it's Gerby. Defensive line is where it's a little bit more debatable, but I think you can make a case that Bryce Young, if everybody pans out and reaches their full potential, Bryce Young is the best defensive lineman that they may have either in college or in the NFL. Linebacker, Kingston. I think that's not overly debatable. Cornerback, Leonard Moore, not debatable. Safety, Tay Johnson. The only reason that's even debatable now is because Joey O'Brien just showed up. But I still think when you look at Joey being a freshman, it's no debate who that guy is right now. And that's Tay Johnson. Think about that. That's a wild stat. And we've got a couple others, Trev, but the thing that this class is going to have a huge impact this season. The question that I have is, how big will the impact be? And that's the one unknown. Because if we're being objective and not like mid-April, everything is awesome, this team's going to win, I love this time of year in the buy sell holds in the summer, in the buy sell holds and mailbags, because it's like buy sell hold. Notre Dame's going to win every game by at least 35. You know, because like we're all so excited about this team, right? We had some of those yesterday, but you know, and I get that. But if we're just trying to like, hey, let's be conservative, let's be you know, as maybe even a little bit critical of this group. The only guy that you can point to and say, oh yeah, he's at his max, or he's at that already at the elite level, is Leonard Moore. That's the only one. CJ was very good last year for a first-year starter. I don't want CJ Carr to just repeat what he was last year. Aeneas Williams has been a great role player at Notre Dame, but now he's got to be something more than that. Tay Johnson, as good as he was, there's also some film on there. I'm like, bro, you got to get better there. You know, because again, first-year starter. You look at Micah Gilbert, loads of talent. He's got 9 career catches because he just hasn't been able to stay healthy and kind of put it all together yet. Anthony Knapp, his not reaching his full potential is really just about how old he is, because most offensive linemen don't reach their full potential as sophomores. It's you know, I don't know how much better Jeremiah Smith is going to be as a junior than he was as a sophomore. You know what I mean? Like some guys are like, same with Leonard Moore. But Anthony Knapp has got a ways to go to reach his full potential. And that doesn't mean ways to go, meaning like you haven't seen the best of Anthony Knapp yet. You haven't seen the best of Gerby Lambert yet. Gerby was great for a redshirt freshman, but you don't want to be a senior or a junior playing like you did as a redshirt freshman. You want your game to evolve and improve. And I think when you go down this list, Trev, that's true for a lot of these guys. So the difference between Notre Dame being like a really good semifinal team, same thing with Kingston, same thing with obviously Cam Williams. The difference between Notre Dame being a team that's going to make a run at the playoffs where they're a semifinal team, and then Notre Dame being that team that we're all projecting to be a team that's more than capable of winning it all, in my view, is going to come down to how many of the kids in this class become those dogs, become those elite players. Like, does CJ go from just being really good, like elite for a redshirt freshman, to just being flat out elite, period? Does Bryce Young become a guy where we're no longer talking about his potential, but we're talking about his production? We're no longer saying what if with Micah Gilbert. And I'm just talking about the starters for now. Anthony Knapp, we're no longer saying, boy, if he moved inside, what could be? What if with, you know, gee, I wish we could see Gerby at we're going to see all those things now, Trev. Hey, you know, if you project Aeneas Williams' numbers out to X number of carries on blah, 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 he would be doing this. Okay, but now we get to see, can he actually translate that to a high level of production? Can he do what Dexter Williams did in 2018, where Dex went from a 30-some carry, 9-point-something yard per carry occasional backup to a 6.9 yard per carry? He was your dog. You know, like those are the things. Anthony Knapp, are we right that now being a junior and moving inside means Anthony Knapp explodes onto the national scene? What I like is there's a lot of non-Notre Dame people that have been at practice that are coming away saying 54 is a dog in guard. I've got a friend who played in the NFL, played offensive line in the NFL, who was at practice. He said that. Gary, I'm drawing a complete blank. Todd Blackledge was at practice recently. That was a comment he made, like how the offensive line looks so good, especially now that Knapp's inside. I'm hearing that a lot from a lot of people that go to practice. 54 is a dog inside. Like, yeah. But will that continue into the fall? Will Gerby Lambert be what we think he'll be at right tackle? Like, those are all the difference between this being a Final Four-ish team and a we're hoisting up the trophy at the end of the year type of team. That's going to be that's the big question with this group.
Agreed. And I'm along the same lines as you, man. I'm excited to see if a lot of the things that we've talked about actually come to fruition, but that's also not going to be without the sacrifice of other players not breaking out. That you're also going to need a level of that from this class as well. Because we could talk about CJ and Leonard Moore and Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert, and rightfully so. But there's a group of players that if this class reaches its ultimate, like this is just no doubt an elite class, because we've already established the premise that they're slept on. Absolutely 100%, we can all agree that this class is slept on. But if this class wants to take the step from like elite to like all time, like, yo, like this was the class that brought Notre Dame home a national championship, you're going to need some breakouts to happen. Some of them we've already talked about. Micah Gilbert just kind of needs to stay healthy so he has the ability to continue what he's been doing the last really 2 springs that he's been on campus. That's the biggest thing for him. What do we see from Cam Williams, a player that you've talked about ad nauseum over the last couple of years, that this is the most physically gifted wide receiver in the room? And that's with guys like Jaden Greathouse emerging and Jordan Faison emerging and getting in Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham. What's the one consistent? So we still think Cam Williams is the most physically gifted wide receiver in that room. Getting Caden Finley, getting Bubba Frazier, and agreed. They're great players. They're going to have great careers at Notre Dame. Cam Williams is the most physically gifted wide receiver in that room. His emergence alone, I would argue, would change the outlook of this class that we were already exceptionally high on, man. It's crazy.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. Because I'm tired of being the one, I'm not saying in you, just in general, because it's not that you've ever pushed back on it, but I'm tired of being the one that always is like, let's not write off Cam Williams just yet. You know, let's remember that Cam Williams has more catches through his first 2 years than Javon McKinley had his first 2 years. He only has 5 fewer catches than what Miles Boykin had through his first 2 years of his career. But the last part is what you said. If Cam Williams has any kind of breakout, like I'm not expecting Cam Williams to go from 1 catch in 2 years to he's Chase Claypool, Will Fuller, Miles Boykin. I'm not expecting that. That's an unfair expectation. On top of not only that, but this is a different roster than what those guys walked into when they had their breakouts. They needed Miles to have his breakout. They needed Chase to have his breakout. They needed Javon McKinley to have that breakout in 2020. They needed Will Fuller to step up and be that guy in 2014 because they didn't have that guy. This team is different because they have Jordan Faison. They have Jaden Greathouse. They have Micah Gilbert. They have the 2 transfers. Like, it's just not needed as much. But if he does, that changes the dynamic of this entire conversation, Trev. It changes the dynamic of this entire offense because if Cam Williams, even if it's just breakout level of like what Parker Livingston did for Texas last year, like 20 catches, 20 plus yards per catch, 4 touchdowns, where he's your number 4 or 5 receiver, but in his 15 snaps, you're throwing him 2 bombs a game and you're throwing him a couple screens because Cam can do some things after the catch. That like I'm not predicting it. We've got to see it. If we go to the Jersey scrimmage on Saturday and Cam blows up, okay, fine, whatever. We saw him catch a touchdown pass in the Jersey scrimmage his first year at Notre Dame where he smoked Chance Tucker on a post route. Oh, okay. But if we go into the fall and Cam has that kind of breakout, this room completely changes because I've said again, I don't know that you have anyone that has just his God-given ability. Look, it's not just my opinion. I know people in the Goog that have had someone that I talked to before camp started who said, look, we all know that he's our most gifted player. He's got to figure out how to use it. I have a friend who is very connected with a lot of NFL scouts. And he said, and he's a Notre Dame, this guy's a Notre Dame fan. He said that he had a scout call him after he visited Notre Dame. I don't know if it was in fall camp or if it was last spring. I think it was this fall camp. And he said, who's number 5? He's like, that's Boubacar Traore defense. He's like, no, on offense. And he was like, oh, it's Cam Williams. He goes, that guy's an SEC wide receiver. I don't know, have a clue why he's not playing. Now, again, this is just a guy watching practice. He doesn't see all the things that Cam's missing on, right? Like, so this isn't a shot at the staff so much, but it's more of like this NFL scout who travels all over and watches all these teams, watches Cam Williams just move and say, that's an SEC wide receiver. And what all those things entail. I hate that expression, but I know what it means when somebody says that. If he starts to actually look like that on Saturdays, this is going to be an amazing year. But we can have that conversation. We could have that conversation about Micah Gilbert. We could have that conversation about Keedron Young. We could have that conversation about Gerby Lambert. We could have that conversation about Kingston Viliama-Asa. We could have that conversation about a lot of guys. And that's what I love about this class. But Cam Williams is kind of like, he's the 24 wild card in the same way that Charles Jagasaw was the 23 wild card. I'm not expecting anything from him. He's got to show me. But if the light goes on, he takes things from here to here. Because here's one thing we do know. CJ Carr is dying for Cam Williams to break out. Because that's his boy. I remember going all the way back to Irish Invasion when they were, when CJ, I think, had just committed, and I don't even think Cam was committed yet. That's been kind of his guy. And if he steps up, then I think that's going to be really, really fun. He's the wild card for me in the 2024 class.
With you completely, man. I'm with you. And there's other players in the 24 class that have the opportunity to step up and to be a big breakout. Cam Williams, I think, leads that charge. You mentioned Micah Gilbert. Let's talk about Kedron Young. He was, when we were talking about, ranking the position groups, you talked about how, Aeneas Williams is in charge of that. But if another player who wasn't hurt right now and Kedron Young was healthy, he might be your most physically talented running back in that room. He's another player where it's coming off of injury. Let's see what he is. He was starting to come along last year in the spring, and he might have forced Jaywan Sider's hand of having a 3 running back rotation because of the skill set he brings to the table. Kedron Young is another player in this class that if he breaks out, the outlook of that room changes, and they're going to need it.
Big time. And I think you can make that case for, there's a lot of things. First of all, there's a lot of things that Kedron could bring to the table if he's healthy. He brings you that hammer. He could be that guy that could help you improve your red zone running just because good luck stopping him for only a yard. He's low, he's thick, he's built, he's well built, he's quick, he's got great vision. Like, those are things that he could bring to the table. He could be a bell cow back. Like, you really need to put a game away, and you're in the third or fourth quarter of a game, and you're trying to run this clock out, and you're trying to just put this team away because they're on their heels, they're tired. You put him in the game and run him down your throat for a whole series, and then that team is just they're broken. There's a lot he brings to the table, but then you look at like some other guys. We all talk about how talented Kingston can be, but I don't think anyone would argue that Kingston has reached anywhere close to his full potential at Notre Dame. And now he's coming off of a knee injury. Like, how good will he be this year? And for Kingston, I don't give a rip at all if Kingston is that dude in September. I don't care if he plays. I don't care if he plays well. I care that from October 17th on that Kingston plays well, because you don't need Kingston Viliama-Asa to beat your first 6 opponents. From BYU on, you're going to need him in that rotation with Drake and Jaden and Jalen and Madden and those guys. You're going to need him in November when you've got, because this November is different than last November's, where you're actually playing like legit top 15 caliber teams. Not like, again, they were good opponents, but like ranked Navy and Army is a little bit different than ranked Miami and maybe SMU. It just is. You haven't had a lot of those opponents in November in recent years. Now you do. I think you could argue the last like pretty decent Power 4 team they've played in November is probably Clemson in 2023, and they lost. Now, the difference here is you get both of these teams at home, and that game's on the road, but this is a different team than that team. And then, before that, it was 22 USC, and you lost. So, but a guy like Kingston could be a big difference in those games. You're trying to stop Darius Mensah in that pass attack. Great way to do it is having Boubacar rush off one side and Kingston rushing off the other side and Bryce rushing on up the middle. Like, that's a great way to stop it. I've said this before. This is a really earth-shattering football analysis here, Trev. Like, this is why I pay myself the big bucks, but it's really hard to throw passes from when you're laying on your back. Just saying.
I have found that difficult.
Just saying. So getting him back to full speed by the middle of the season to end of the season is going to be important. If Kingston Viliama has 1 sack in the regular season, I don't care if that means he's healthy and ready to go come round 1 of the playoffs. Just don't care. It'd be nice if he could, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, but as long as, actually, let me rephrase that. I don't care if he has a single sack prior to November 7th. As long as he's ready to roll from November 7th on, I am good to go. Very good to go. And Tristan backed me up, Trev. He goes, agree, ask Caleb Williams. It's exactly my point. Remember what Caleb Williams did to Notre Dame in 2022 when they decided not to rush him? He tore him up, and they ran the ball. He was scrambling, just completed 80+% of his passes. Same kid, a year later, Notre Dame heats him up. He's getting hit. He's laying down. What happens? Worst game of his career, and Notre Dame dominates. That's exactly my point. It's a perfect kind of putting a specific example to the point we're making. But Kingston's a big one. But I would argue that if I look at this class, Cam is that one breakout. As we wrap up, Trev, here's a crazy stat I want to share with people that I shared with you the other day. There was a BISA hold that we got on yesterday, that said the number of draft picks from the 2026 class was 6.5. We could go through this roster and again, since it's early and guys haven't done, guys are still waiting to step up. We could point to way more than 7 guys that could get drafted and be like, it wasn't draft picks, it was decent NFL contributors. Here's a crazy thought for you. And I'm going to throw this out there, Trev. I want to get your feedback on it, even though you know what I'm going to say. And then I want to get the chat's thoughts on this. Potential, just potential, how the next couple of years is going to go. There's the potential for at least 7 first-round draft picks from the 2024 class. First round. Now, your first thought is what? That's nuts. If I'd have told you that, Trev, without sending you the list, and I just said, Trev, I think there's 7 potential first-round draft picks, at least in the 24 class, I think your first response would have been like, all right, what? I've never had blue and gold Kool-Aid, but I'd like some. Pass that over. What's in that? But then I sent you the list, and think about it. CJ Carr, Gerby Lambert, Anthony Knapp, Bryce Young, Leonard Moore, Tay Johnson, and Kingston Viliama-Asa. I put Tay and Kingston last because of the 7, they play the least premium position draft status of the 7. Linebackers and safeties tend to not get drafted as high as other guys, although Kingston, if he's the player we think he could be, is different than your typical off-ball linebacker because he's got some Arvin Reese to his game where you can just line him up on the edge and also just have him come after the quarterback. But think about that. That doesn't include Cam Williams. It doesn't include Micah Gilbert. It doesn't include
either of the running backs,
Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams. Like, it doesn't include Logan Thomas. It doesn't include any of those guys. It just those 7. Like, when you think about that, you're like, holy crap, I don't think that's a crazy thought. I'm not saying they're all going to be 7 or in the first round. I'm saying all 7 of those have the potential to be first-round draft picks. Again, not predicting 7, not saying it'll definitely happen, but are any of those guys, and I'll ask you, Trev, and anybody in the chat, are any of those guys, when I told you their names, are any of them are like, dude, that's nuts. That's not a first-round pick?
No. I mean, my first question, if you would have just said that without sending over a list, my first question would have been in the same draft. That I don't know about. But
no, because I don't see them all in the same draft.
Yeah.
But like CJ comes out next year. I don't know that Gerby and Knapp do. I don't know. Kingston's not coming out after this year, most likely. You know what I mean? Like, Bryce Young's probably not coming out. Like, Leonard is, CJ is, but like, yes. I mean, over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And again, not all 7 of them, but are any of those guys you're like, dude, that guy is not a first-round draft pick. You're drinking the blue and gold Kool-Aid right now.
Nope.
Because I didn't list. I mean, I'd got a little nuts if I'd have been like Cam Williams also. Like, dog, he's got 1 career catch. Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams, between the 2 of them, have 10 career catches, and they're averaging about 10 yards a catch. Like, can we pump the brakes a little bit? I'm not even including those, but you wouldn't have blinked twice if I'd have put Cam Williams and then said ... if he reaches his full potential. I just went with guys that have played like meaningful snaps and proven something.
Yeah. That's
a crazy list. And who of those guys, if I'd have told you, there's one guy on that list that if I'd have told you coming out of high school is going to develop into a first-round pick that you just scoffed at, and that's Anthony Knapp. and I would have too. I wouldn't have scoffed at at Leonard Moore because I thought he had a super high ceiling and he was going to get coached by Mike Mickens. Like a lot of those other guys, Bryce Young, Kingston, Gerby. I think they only got Tay. I think the only guy that would have, I had Tay Johnson as a top 100 player. I should have done this when we did the ranking is like, it's one thing to criticize people for their rankings if you don't provide your own. So like with Tay, I had Tay as a top 100 player with 5-star upside. My only concern about Tay, injuries. That's it. Well, we didn't see him play a whole lot of safety. Well, that's what you're not a good enough evaluator to be able to look at a kid and say, I think, the skill set translates. Like CJ Carr has a 5-star. Gerby has a 5-star. I even gave Anthony Knapp 4.5-star upside. I just thought he was, going to need some more work. Bryce Young I had as a 5-star upside guy. Kingston I had as a 5-star upside guy. Top 50 recruit, 5-star upside. The lowest ranking on there for me was Knapp and Leonard Moore. And again, as I've explained with Leonard Moore, it was because we just didn't get to see a lot of his senior season because of injuries. But I'm as a 4.5-star upside guy as a junior. I remember watching this film and be like, look, you can see the speed when he was doing kick returns. Like, dude could fly. I don't think that's a crazy list, Trev. And we haven't seen that at Notre Dame in a very, very long time. We've seen it. I think the 1990 class might have been close to that, if I remember correctly, Trev. Let me go look at that real quick. So the 1990 class, off the top of my head, had Rick Meyer was an 89 recruit, but Bryant Young was in the 90 class. Aaron Taylor was in the 90 class. Jeff Burris was in the 90 class. Jerome Bettis was in the 90 class. Tom Carter was in the 90 class. I think Irv Smith was in the 90 class, but I'm not sure. Those were all first-round draft picks, and they were all taken in the first round. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
That ain't bad.
Yeah. Again, not saying they all will. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's not going to pan out. Somebody's going to, but all of those guys there, I think that says a lot about how good, how talented, elite talent. This is why we say this is where the star power comes from. I love the 23 class. If I'm looking through that list, Trev, who are the potential first-round picks in that class? Boubacar. I think Drake Bowen's going to get drafted, but I don't know that he's the kind of off-ball linebacker that goes around 1. I can see him going around day 2. Who would that guy be in the 24 class? A lot of good NFL players on there, but not that first round. Boom. That's my point. That's why we separate the two. This class is vitally important. This is vitally important, but they're providing two different things to this roster that both have to go together. That's partly why we think this team can be so good, because it's not just one or. It's not just a bunch of great leaders and not star power. It's not just star power with no discipline, no leadership, no depth, no hard hitters, no blue collar. These two classes together give you some of that, give you all of that. It all, when you put it together, that's what they are. That's why we felt these classes were super underrated. At the time, we've been proven to be correct with how it is. And if this Notre Dame team is going to win it all, it's going to be primarily on the backs of this class. There's going to be 25 kids that make an impact. There's going to be freshmen that make an impact. There's going to be transfers that make an impact. There's going to be 21 and 22 guys, Jason Onye, Ashton Craig, that make an impact. But this is the foundation. This is the heart and soul. This is where the star power is. It's the 23 and 24 classes, your junior and senior years. The first 2 full classes of Marcus Freeman are going to show us, yeah, this guy knows what he's doing when it comes to recruiting. And the staff that he had at the time knew what they were doing. And I'm excited to see it.
Folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Brian and I will be back tomorrow for the midweek rundown. Not going to want to miss that one. Still sticking with the recruiting topic. Definitely not going to want to miss that show. We go live at 1 p.m. If you haven't gotten enough of me, I'm going to be on the IB Nation Sports Beat show tonight at 5:05. A lot of fun topics that we're going to be talking about. So tune in, 5:05 p.m. That goes live. IB Nation Sports Beat. On your way out of this show, Please be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here and the best way to stay in tune, we got the Blue Gold game coming up. There's a big practice on Saturday that we're going to be in attendance at. Then obviously, bulk of the offseason summer's coming up. Best way to stay in tune is be a premium message board subscriber at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, until tomorrow afternoon, that is Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.